the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 576 Air Defense Alert. By the time Nelson brought his son Larry to Harvey, Reiner and Chris had already arrived, having heard the news. The fact that civilians were secretly using connections to obtain and modify engineered alchemy beasts was a major problem, not a minor one. While the Emperor and the government had turned a blind eye, it also exposed the existence of self-serving, unscrupulous individuals within the official community. Your Majesty, the disposal of the alchemy beast's soul cores was indeed a mistake made by the laboratory. I will strictly discipline the lab staff and ensure this never happens again. As the head of the alchemy lab, Chris knew his responsibility and, before Reiner could even speak, he took the blame. Reiner was calm. After asking about the details of what happened, he turned to Harvey and said, "Your Majesty, shouldn't the more important issue be the intelligence about the suspected activities of the demon lizardmen in Great Bear Lake? The issue of the influx of alchemical beasts into the civilian population can be handed over to the Ministry of Justice for further investigation. At present, of course, the first thing to do now is to send an airship reconnaissance team back to the Great Bear Lake area to conduct a carpet search and find out thoroughly whether the demon lizardmen are really lurking in that area." Harvey tapped the table with his fingers and chuckled. "Do you think I really can't tell the priorities? The military had already taken action before you came." He paused, turned to look at the young man brought by Nelson, who was about 15 or 16 years old. He looked like he had just graduated from a public college and was not even old enough to join the army or work. Mr. Larry, tell me in detail what you and your hunting team discovered in the Big Bear Lake area. Tell me everything, big or small, including, of course, your use of modified alchemical beasts." The boy named Larry looked very similar to his father Nelson. It was also his first time to meet His Majesty the Emperor at such a close distance. His body trembled slightly with fear, but his tone was relatively steady. "Your Majesty, we set out a month ago for the Big Bear Lake area. Because of the continuous sweeps around the royal capital by government exploration teams and the military, local beasts like the blood claw bear have been forced to migrate to farther places, and Big Bear Lake is their favorite winter hibernation place. The claws of the blood claw bear are a magical material that is a specialty of the north. Since it cannot be bred and tracking and hunting is time-consuming, official hunting teams do not often list it as the primary target. Alchemical laboratories and medical institutions often openly seek to buy it from the public, and the prices offered are enough to attract people to spontaneously form hunting teams to go pan for gold. After all, the blood claw bears, dormant during winter, aren't inherently aggressive or dangerous. The challenge lies in finding their hidden dens. However, this expedition into the wilderness is crucial. Without the protection of their mana guns, the hunting team, armed only with bows and melee weapons, faces the same dangers as encountering fell orcs and ferocious beasts. Therefore, a folk mechanic like Larry, skilled in modifying and manipulating alchemy beasts, becomes the ideal choice, hired privately and at a substantial price. Larry brought to Big Bear Lake 3 armed alchemy beasts he had personally modified, each containing a soul core that had been partially destroyed after the alchemy laboratory was scrapped. A distinguished mechanic in public college, and with his father, a high-ranking military officer, he'd learned a great deal about alchemy beast technology. Through his explorations, he was able to revitalize a nearly depleted soul core, creating 3 tattered, second-hand soul creatures. The engineering alchemy beast was originally modified from the prototype of the wolf spider beast. Its 4 pairs of spider-like limbs naturally have the ability to climb off-road. Its sharp legs and sharp mouth parts are also a favorable guarantee for dealing with dangers in the wild. With its protection, the hunting team spent more than half a month to advance safely to the Big Bear Lake area, and was preparing to hunt the blood claw bear. But when we finally arrived at Great Bear Lake, we discovered that the area surrounding the lake appeared to have recently experienced a massive fire. Traces of burns were everywhere, and much of the vegetation that hadn't been completely burned was covered in thick, sticky black water. It looked strikingly similar to the Blackwater weapons reported by City Hall and in the newspapers. We didn't dare approach the lake, so we collected a small amount and immediately returned the way we'd come. The alchemy lab technician hurriedly delivered the test report. Harvey took it, glanced through it, and nodded. Yes, after comparative testing in the lab, what you found at Great Bear Lake is indeed the Blackwater weapon of the Black Lizards, the ignition they use to spray and burn the wasteland. Your Majesty, since we've confirmed the presence of the Black Lizards, why not just send a reconnaissance airship? I suggest summoning the military immediately and notifying General Pierce at the IC base, Reiner suggested decisively to Harvey. Harvey nodded in approval and ordered 2 guards to immediately send a communication to summon higher-ranking military officials. Unlike the IC base thousands of miles away, Great Bear Lake is less than 800 miles from Spark City. A reconnaissance airship, flying at full speed, can reach it in just 10 hours. The demon lizardmen have effectively struck Spark City head-on. If they were to send their winged creatures to launch a surprise attack, they could, in principle, launch their attack the next morning and arrive the next day, launching in the blink of an eye. Notify the military headquarters to activate the first-level air defense warning. All defense forces and northern troops are on combat readiness. The garrison at the Valley Outpost must mobilize the forces of 2 battalions and immediately advance to the northwest area of Great Bear Lake. Cooperate with the Air Force to launch a carpet search. Don't miss any opportunity for the lizardmen to infiltrate. He paused, turned to look at Nelson, who was pale and embarrassed, and said in a cold voice, "Let's put the issue of tracing Colonel Nelson's guilt aside for the time being. You must return to the Defense Corps immediately and wait for the combat readiness order issued by the military headquarters." "Yes, Your Majesty." The half-orc officer subconsciously put his feet together, clenched his fists on his chest and saluted, then thought of something, and added with a bitter expression, "Your Majesty. My son Larry. I beg you to be lenient with him." Harvey waved his hand impatiently, urging him to retreat as soon as possible. "The crime committed by your son is not as serious as yours. Don't worry, it will not reach the point of being shot or hanged. Obey the order immediately." Nelson glanced at his son reluctantly, then resolutely turned and left. Left alone, Larry looked terrified, sweat dripping down his young face. He trembled and asked, "Your Majesty, will my crime result in deprivation of my student status and expulsion from the country, since he wasn't facing a direct sentence of execution or hanging for having angered His Majesty?" The boy's first thought was naturally that he would be stripped of his citizenship of the capital, sentenced to imprisonment with hard labor, or expulsion from the country. Harvey looked up at him and chuckled. "It's not that serious. Although you have violated several laws of the kingdom, there is still a chance for you to make meritorious contributions and have your sentence reduced." As he spoke, he gave Chris a meaningful look. Chris immediately understood and stood up and said happily, "Larry Nelson, you will be assigned to the Alchemy Laboratory Department and be under my direct management. The specific duration of your stay, I will discuss it with the Ministry of Justice after the first-level air defense alert in the royal capital is over." Harvey stood up, walked over to the pale-faced boy, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Don't be depressed. Working with Director Chris, you can learn the alchemical knowledge you've always dreamed of. You don't have to collect alchemical parts in secret like before. You will see many alchemical creations you have never seen before, but before that, you must tell us in detail how you reactivated the alchemical beast whose soul core was on the verge of exhaustion." Chapter 577, The Temptation of Aliens. "Oh? So, when did you stumble upon the wirelessly rechargeable magic amplifiers scattered throughout the capital?" Harvey sat upright in a covered alchemy cart, escorted by a large group of Imperial guards, heading for the alchemy laboratory. Larry, a young second-generation military man, sat trembling in the seat beside him. "Your Majesty, initially, I just heard my father casually mention that there were large energy-gathering arrays beneath the military barracks and the repair center. So I quietly took the damaged soul core to those 2 locations, and indeed, they showed a slight reaction within the magic radiation zone." He then immediately realized that he didn't need to directly connect the core to the energy-gathering array to draw sufficient magic power out of thin air. After repeated attempts, he finally determined that invisible magic fluctuations were present in the industrial park near the military factory, the territory's People's Hospital, the Academy of Magical Sciences, and the Alchemy Laboratory. Of course, the castle area, where the wireless magic amplification effect was strongest, was also the Emperor's private residence. Due to the heavy security, the young man did not dare to approach easily. Seeing the boy was honest and had thoroughly confessed his illegal behavior, Harvey nodded in satisfaction and asked, puzzled, since you're a qualified graduate of the public college's intermediate vocational education, why didn't you choose to continue your studies in the advanced teaching department, or join the government department after graduation? Larry looked bitter and hesitant. Your Majesty, my father wanted me to enlist in the army, but I've tried hard. Even for the defense force, which has more relaxed recruitment requirements, I couldn't pass the physical test. My stepmother is from the Southland. Rather than joining the army, she hopes that I will inherit my grandfather's freight company when I reach adulthood. After all, my family has the contract for 2 armored freighters. Wow. They were one of the few elite families in Spark City. Harvey immediately understood. This child looked like a pure-blooded half-orc, but his father had remarried a pure-blooded human, and the couple had a mixed-race marriage. The fact that his family business was able to secure the contract for the armored freighter, a contract awarded through public government bidding, at least indicated that his grandfather was a minor noble with an honorary title. The fact that he allowed his children to marry into a foreign military demonstrated his open-minded and progressive thinking, and a far-sighted decision. He was indeed a young man with a clean background. Harvey nodded secretly, raised his hand and nodded to Chris, who sat in the front row, and whispered, "You will personally teach this child from now on. I believe he has a bright future." Larry shuddered, and said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty. Your Majesty, what about my and my father's crimes? It depends on your respective performances to see if they are sufficient to atone for them." As the Emperor of the United Kingdom of the North and St. Valen, he possessed the supreme power of immunity from all crimes, allowing him to pardon serious crimes committed by his subjects without trial at the government office or the Ministry of Justice. However, such forgiveness was not without cost, otherwise, the Emperor's authority and credibility would be damaged to a certain extent. Atoning for his crimes, supplemented by a moderate bail and demotion, was a suitable option. Just as the 3 of them were discussing the future development and study plans of Larry, the second-generation military officer, a shrill siren suddenly blared in the distance to the north. Wah-oo-wah-oo-hum. Alchemical speakers hung in every corner of the street blared with a shrill roar. Many people who happened to be staying below covered their ears and scattered, but their faces showed no sign of panic. The Emperor's motorcade also abruptly stopped. The guards in charge of the carriages gripped the steering wheel tightly with both hands and turned to look at Harvey in a daze. Captain Tommy, the Imperial Guard, was the first to react. He leaped onto the Emperor's limousine in 2 steps, grasped Harvey's arm, and urgently declared, "Your Majesty, please order the convoy to return the same way. According to the Royal Capital's defense regulations, you must take shelter within the castle." Before Harvey could even open his mouth to object, Chris had already pushed the stunned driver aside, slid into the driver's seat, and shouted, "The return route is too far. The alchemy laboratory also has a basement. Your Majesty, please follow me to the laboratory immediately." He slammed the accelerator, ignoring the guards blocking the wheelchair and preparing to drive straight into the laboratory compound. What a fuss. Harvey rolled his eyes helplessly and raised his hand slightly. Hundreds of thousands of energy-absorbing beetles suddenly gushed out of the sewers along the street, swarming the vehicle like a lightning torrent. The sheer number of beetles brought a wheelchair to a screeching halt. Why panic? It's just an air raid siren. We're still a half-hour drive from the city walls. Could the lizardmen be surmounting the defense force's newly deployed beam anti-aircraft weapons and making their way directly to the heart of the inner city? If the enemy truly possessed such formidable capabilities, why bother resisting? The human race should simply give up. He pushed aside Tommy's arm, stepped off the wheelbarrow, and gazed north. The defense forces responsible for the royal city's defense had numerous reconnaissance airships hovering outside the city walls, and alchemical telescopes constantly monitored the city walls. The likelihood of a false alarm was low. The one who could have sounded the air raid sirens without going through the various layers of escalation was most likely a lizardman-winged creature. Judging by the agility of these flying aliens, they were likely coming from the Great Bear Lake area. It was unclear what route they had chosen to bypass the blanket cordon of the valley outposts and advance beyond Spark City. However, it's foreseeable that the fact they were able to sneak past the security zone and penetrate this deep into the area suggests this isn't a large-scale airborne advance, but rather a single, exploratory operation. Harvey longed to scale the northern wall himself to see what was happening, but doing so would inadvertently place immense pressure on the defense forces, and the royal guards would undoubtedly vehemently oppose him. In such situations, the royal guards often treated themselves as defenseless, vulnerable mortals, completely forgetting that their bloodline lord possessed another spellcaster. Waving off the swarm of beetles enveloping the wheelbarrow, Harvey sighed helplessly and said, "Go to the lab and contact military headquarters immediately. Have the highest commander of the defense forces report directly to me." "Yes," Tommy replied, leaning forward with a serious expression. As soon as they entered the lab hall, Deputy Royal Guard Captain Tito hurried over, carrying a heavy alchemical communicator. "Your Majesty, Colonel Vaughn and Colonel Nelson are sending you a message." Harvey took the receiver, and two familiar voices rang out. "Your Majesty, 5 miles due north of the capital, a reconnaissance airship spotted a large group of winged demon lizards, flying at low altitude and approaching the city walls in a cross-cover formation. The north gate has been closed. The 2nd Regiment of the Defense Force assembled 2 minutes ago and is currently on standby within the city walls. We are urgently evacuating the residents of the outer city. We anticipate activating our air defense system in 10 minutes. Chapter 578, Counter-Air Raid, Part 1. Nelson stood within the city wall's defensive fortress, his eyes glued to the alchemical telescope, his palms slightly brimming with sweat. This was his first time seeing the demonic lizardmen in person. These monsters, flying low and close to the treetops of the dense forest, their wingspans alone were likely 4 or 5 meters long. Compared to the anatomical specimens displayed in the city hall or the magic stone images they were forced to repeatedly watch at military meetings, the sight of these living targets clearly intimidated him. 120. Colonel, 3 counts and calibrations confirm a total of 120 incoming enemies, the soldier in charge of observation reported, leaning forward. Nelson frowned slightly, unable to resist emphasizing, 120. What kind of people? These monsters can't even be described as human. Through the alchemical telescope's enhanced visual range, the enemy's features were crystal clear, their bat-like wings, their twisted limbs far beyond those of the normal human, their swollen joints, and the crimson crystal visor on the front of their heads, and the breathing sacs behind their ears that continuously expanded and contracted. Each winged one carried a rusted blackwater weapon canister on its back, but this didn't mean the enemy would only use blackwater attacks. The previous attack on the Ice Sea base sentry had clearly demonstrated that these monsters, having rapidly evolved flight, strangely possessed both blackwater and red light attacks. The artillery on the city wall had already peeled back its waterproof coverings, and the soldiers from both battalions had entered their designated combat zones. No one showed any sign of panic, not even a whisper between the soldiers, their gaze fixed fixedly in the same direction. Everyone had one ultimate goal in mind. Not a single winged one could be allowed to easily evade the city wall's air defenses and directly invade the royal capital, where the people lived. General Pierce, the army's commander, was currently thousands of miles away at the Ice Sea base. The Northern Army, currently commanded by Colonel Vaughn, commander of the 1st Independent Regiment, had also ascended the city wall to discuss engagement tactics with Nelson in the command fortress. Our beam weapons are all preheated. Against these fly-like creatures, artillery and machine guns are probably useless. I believe they'll disperse the moment they approach the city walls, attempting to overrun them and enter the capital. Vaughn had, after all, fought the enemy once before. While he had never actually faced the winged ones, he knew them well from numerous meeting recaps and actual combat footage. Furthermore, the Northern Army was clearly superior to the Defense Army in both status and combat power. It wouldn't be considered an overreach for him to offer direct advice directly to Nelson. Nelson felt a little unhappy in his heart, but he still forced himself to ask, do we need to consider how to deal with them after they accidentally break through the defense line? Some factories and industrial parks near the North City Wall have not forced the people to evacuate. Vaughn shook his head and said decisively, that's not necessary. The Independent Airship Regiment has already taken off. Even if the enemy intends to forcibly climb to higher altitude to avoid the anti-aircraft beams of the city wall, they will be directly exposed to the long-range sniping of the airship team. Our Air Force is also equipped with light-speed weapons. As soon as the voice fell, the observing soldier immediately reported loudly, Commander, the enemy is approaching the city wall. The specific visual distance is within 1 mile. They are really trying to climb to higher altitude. Defense Battalion 1 requests to open fire. Defense Battalion 2 requests to open fire. Nelson raised his hand to pick up the communicator, and was about to speak, but Vaughn held his arm and said in a deep voice, wait. Let them get closer, Although he hesitated for only a moment, the communicator continued to ring with requests to open fire from combat departments in various areas. Interspersed with these were real-time reports from several observation points. Target confirmed. Close enough to be observed with a naked eye, 800 meters, 700 meters, 600 meters, 11 o'clock. Targets are deployed in a goose formation, 500 meters. Vaughn released his restraining arm and whispered, "You may order to fire." Schick strained to keep his eyes wide open, his gaze fixed on the 11 o'clock direction to the north, the enemy's high-speed flight firmly framed within his field of vision. He had seen enemy carcasses during training shortly after joining the army, and had repeatedly watched combat footage during nighttime study sessions, but today on the city wall was his first time seeing the demon lizardman in person. He felt no fear, however. Although his arms trembled slightly with nervousness, it was simply due to his unfamiliarity with beam weapons, and even with veterans guiding him, he likely wouldn't have the opportunity to personally operate this newly deployed weapon. They had expected the enemy to climb as high as possible before approaching the city walls, attempting to completely bypass them and invade the capital directly. However, they had overestimated their intelligence. After a brief climb to a height of about 200 meters above the ground, the winged ones immediately deployed their formation and dived towards the soldiers gathered on the city walls. Perhaps they believed these soldiers, exposed to their view, were defenseless and sitting ducks. Beam energy weapons, mounted on airships, primarily employed cluster attacks, concentrating energy to the extreme for extreme long-range fire. However, the anti-aircraft weapon systems deployed on the city walls employed the opposite strategy, abandoning their maximum range of 2,000 meters and employing honeycomb systems to disperse their energy beams in a blanket manner. Although their range was less than 500 meters, the concentrated fire of dozens of beam cannons was enough to create a nearly impenetrable web of fire across the sky. During numerous actual combat drills, they were even able to prevent fist-sized spherical targets dropped from airships from escaping the fire zone, being shattered by the dense beams. When the command to fire came over the communicator mounted on the city wall, Schick instinctively turned to look at his veteran instructor. He saw an expression of inexplicable confidence and disdain on his face. He expertly raised his beam cannon, instantly centering the obliquely upward target within the sights. Aim, lock, fire. The veteran took a deep breath, grinning, and pulled the trigger. A blazing glow erupted from the muzzle of the beam cannon. A thick beam of light erupted from the barrel, instantly disintegrating into countless tiny points of light that scattered in front of the weapon like a scattering of flowers, forming a dazzling, vast web of light. Almost simultaneously, several adjacent anti-aircraft teams on either side opened fire. The intense buzzing of the energy weapon stung Schick's ears, and the city wall seemed to seethe with excitement. The winged demon lizardman dived, colliding head-on with the impenetrable air defense network. The next moment, the sky erupted in a dazzling display of red and black fireworks. As the fireworks bloomed, a shower of bloody fragments of flesh and blood fell from the sky. In the chaos, Schick even saw a small fragment of flesh wing, impacted by the beam's energy, land squarely a few meters in front of him. The air suddenly filled with a strange, yet sickening, stench of rust. Chapter 579, Counter-Air Raid, Part 2. The 20 or so winged ones charging in the front collided head-on with the defender's web of light, instantly reduced to smithereens by the cascading beam weapons. A bloody rain fell from the entire city wall, forcing the remaining enemies behind to abruptly halt their dive and fend for themselves with their flesh wings. Simultaneously, sniper teams flanking the anti-aircraft defenses quickly locked onto them. Sporadic gunfire echoed across the city wall, only to be replaced by distant enemies, who had just stabilized their hovering form. Being directly hit by bullets, their entire bodies snapped in two and plummeted to the ground. More and more enemies were exposed to sniper fire, the deadly threat from the city wall forcing them to maintain their flight to avoid the scythe of death. Schick narrowed his eyes and suddenly saw three winged beings staggering away from the enemy's aerial formation, huddling together. Two of them extended their long, twisted arms and grasped the third's shoulders. Through the telescope, he could clearly see their thin arms suddenly swell to double their size. The enemy whose shoulders were being pressed suddenly raised their hands together, their palms blazing with a flash of red light. "Be careful," several observers, noticing the unusual situation, shouted in alarm. The soldiers instinctively ducked for cover behind the battlements. A fierce bombardment erupted instantly, and amidst the smoke and dust, a small, semi-enclosed sentry post on the wall collapsed in half. Several soldiers, unable to escape in time, were trapped under a pile of brick and stone rubble, blood seeping slowly through the debris. The medical team quickly arrived, climbing the steps of the city wall and, under the cover of the soldiers, began to rescue the enemy. Although the scene was chaotic for a moment, the vast majority of soldiers remained steadfast and refused to desert. A winged one, unleashing a powerful red light attack, was struck by an airship squadron from behind. After struggling for a moment, it crashed headfirst into the solid city wall, leaving a massive red-black bruise. The soldiers atop the wall erupted in cheers. Dozens of combat airships also arrived at this moment, passing directly over the city walls, pursuing the fleeing enemy in the distance. Nelson, who had been overseeing the battle from the city walls, finally breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the enemy hadn't deployed a large force in this unexpected air attack. Although the defenders' inexperience had exposed their shortcomings, their anti-aircraft beams successfully routed and annihilated them. In just half an hour of rapid combat, only the three winged one's red light attack, formed in formation, caused minor losses for the defenders. A wall post collapsed, killing 2 soldiers. 3 others were seriously injured and immediately rushed to the military hospital. Thinking of this, he instinctively turned to look at Vaughn, whose expression was strangely solemn. He asked in confusion, "The enemy's red light attack is many times more powerful than expected. It's completely incomparable to what we saw in the battle footage. What is going on?" Vaughn placed a hand on his officer's sword. After a moment's silence, he gritted his teeth and said, "Have these damned monsters mastered the collective magic of human spellcasters?" Unable to verify his suspicions, he naturally wouldn't respond easily to Nelson's question. He could only say in a deep voice, "Don't raise the alarm yet. Wait until the airship team completes the pursuit. I must see His Majesty immediately and report the battle situation to him." Without waiting for a response, he turned and hurried down the wall. By the time Vaughn crossed the inner city and arrived at the alchemy lab, Harvey had already received battle reports via the alchemy communicator. Aside from the enemies killed directly by anti-aircraft weapons, the airship team spared not a single fleeing winged one, and this anti-airstrike operation could be considered a complete victory. "Did you see with your own eyes that winged one, through the connection with 2 others of its kind, unleash a powerful red light?" Harvey asked, frowning as he paced slowly across the room. "Your Majesty, it's absolutely true. The other winged ones also attempted to attack us, but whether it was the black crystal thorns or ordinary red lightning, they couldn't reach the city walls at all. The range advantage of beam weapons is very obvious, but these alien races had never fought against a mage warband before. Even if they possess the ability of evolutionary simulation, how could they have learned this spellcasting technique unique to human wizards out of thin air? It couldn't be that this talent suddenly awakened spontaneously during the previous battle? If the enemy truly possessed the terrifying ability to evolve instantly, even if only a few high-ranking members of their species possessed this trait, it would pose a formidable threat to Harvey. This would also indirectly explain why they didn't immediately launch a large-scale invasion after revealing the existence of their 2 floating island fortresses. They were observing and simulating the various combat strengths and characteristics of humans, learning from them and, when the time was right, retaliating. Harvey sighed and was about to inquire about the public's reaction to the air raid when a personal guard hurried in from outside the laboratory and bowed, reporting, "Your Majesty, the reconnaissance airships heading to Great Bear Lake have reported back that the Saurian floating island number 3 has indeed appeared there." "How large is the island?" "It appears to be comparable to island number 1 in the ice-angered rift. It should be a secondary fortress, not as important as the second main fortress in the ICC. Can we discern the enemy's intentions?" "What about the troop capacity of island number 3? Vaughn, unable to resist, straightened up and eagerly asked before Harvey could. The guard in charge of conveying the message shook his head. "In order to avoid exposing the trace of the airship, the reconnaissance team is very far away from the location of the floating island. They can only observe the general situation through the telescope, and cannot fully understand the transported troops inside." Vaughn's brows were frowned even more than Harvey's. "Your Majesty, please immediately stop sending reinforcements to the IC base. I suggest that the Northern Army change its target and focus on dealing with the number 3 floating island that appeared in the Great Bear Lake. After all, it is the alien fortress closest to Spark City. The winged ones can even cleverly bypass the cordon of the Valley Outpost, reach the foot of the Divine Spine Mountains within a day and a night, and launch a tentative raid on the royal capital. To counter the Ice-Anger defensive, The border operation plan has already mobilized 2 regiments, totaling 6,000 soldiers. If the Ice Sea base continues to increase its forces, reaching the planned strength of 2 regiments, the remaining defense force in Spark City will be only a single Northern Army regiment. Even with the addition of 2 inexperienced defense regiments, the heart of the kingdom will be left vulnerable, a cause for concern. Harvey pondered for a moment, then spoke slowly. As soon as the air raid alert is lifted, follow me back to the castle. Inform the 2 chief ministers, and ask them to meet with me as soon as possible. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 580 Shallow Water Heavy Artillery. The Union's battle mages have never had any contact with these alien races. We absolutely cannot conceal such crucial information, Salas said solemnly. Dawson, dressed in a simple, classical robe and clearly fresh from the academy, nodded and echoed, indeed, since the demons lingering in the Evil Moon Mountains retreated, Gallagher has continued to dispatch reconnaissance airships to explore the wasteland. Aside from observing large-scale demon troop movements, there's been no sign of any alien activity. They all knew that if the lizardmen invaded the southern border from the Evil Moon Mountains, the demons in the western wasteland would be their primary target. Black Rock City would remain unthreatened until this warlike, bloodthirsty humanoid race was completely defeated. The 2 legendary chiefs had heard about the air raid sirens, but they were still exiles in the northern border. Without Harvey's request for assistance, they would not intervene without authorization, out of basic respect. It was just an exploratory attack, and it didn't cause any damage to Spark City. Harvey paused and sighed. But what worries me is that their fighting style seems to be evolving at a much faster pace. Sarath pondered for a moment, then slowly said, do you plan to immediately attack the alien fortress at Great Bear Lake? Indeed, but relying solely on a slow advance by ground troops wouldn't be enough to achieve a surprise attack, and it might even alert the enemy. We don't know if there are more minor floating islands in the Great Bear Lake area. After all, Spark City relies on its towering walls and pre-deployed air defenses. Even facing an enemy several times its size, it can calmly and decisively counterattack through its tight defenses. However, if they decide to launch an offensive, deploying troops across the wasteland hundreds of miles away to fight an alien fortress entrenched with tens of thousands of demon lizardmen, a single regiment would be completely insufficient. Unless it's absolutely necessary, Harvey will never choose to engage in a bloody stalemate and war of attrition with the enemy. The exchange tactic of eroding humanity's manpower is a slow-burning poison that leads to failure. The Black Rock City Mage Warband, led by Son of Flame and Stormwalker, has already reached the old capital and will arrive in the north in as little as 3 days. Salas, fully aware of Harvey's likely strategy, offered a suggestion. Rather than having mortal soldiers slowly advance on the enemy, 8 high-level spellcasters and nearly 100 mid-level battle mages, armed with sufficient high-explosive bombs, could be a better plan for an aerial bombardment. He turned to Dawson, winked, and chuckled. Of course, if you ask, it's not impossible to have Dawson join this surprise attack to provide a significant boost. Suddenly named, Dawson rubbed his red nose and said awkwardly, speaking of battle, well, it was 60 years ago, before I ascended to legendary rank. During my rotation in Black Rock City, research spellcasters typically battle within magic laboratories. Harvey waved his hands and laughed when he heard this. It's not so serious that the chief needs to rush to the battlefield in person. As he spoke, the military secretary hurriedly knocked on the door and walked into the office, respectfully placing a freshly completed report on the table. Harvey picked it up and flipped through it for a moment. Then nodded to himself and said, this is the surprise attack plan on Great Bear Lake that the military has just discussed and customized. Please have a look at it, Your Excellency. The 2 chiefs, Salas only took a look and said in surprise, seeing our tactics? You plan to dispatch ironclad warships to cooperate with the airship team? Yes, airships alone can't penetrate the defense of the floating island. If we want to consume the enemy's manpower to the maximum extent, we also need to supplement it with the ironclad ship's artillery fire. He stood up and suggested to the 2 chiefs, the specific implementation of tactics still requires close cooperation from the Federation's combat mages. Let's go to the warship port first and talk as we walk. The first generation of ironclad ships manufactured by Spark City did not consider the transportation of heavy firepower weapons from the beginning. After the North completely doubled its steel production, Harvey began to slowly replace the first generation of ironclad ships, either converting them from military to civilian use or transferring them to other riverside cities in the south for garrison. He then intensively began the development of the second generation of ironclad ships. To build the larger new ironclad warships, he purposely constructed a deep-water inland port in the lower reaches of the Ice River east of the capital, at a bend where the East Coast garrison was located. He deployed numerous engineering alchemists to widen the river, erected a high perimeter wall, and stationed defense troops there. Rather than building a bridge across the river, the ice tributaries, only a few hundred meters wide, and the main river, at 500 or 600 meters wide, were perfectly suited for constructing a large deep-water dock. The group arrived at the port in a grand procession of alchemy carts, and under the gaze of the workers, they entered the largest dock, Dock Number 1. Such a massive metal construction, is it truly a feat accomplished by mere mortals? Saris gathered his sleeves and raised his head slightly to gaze at the massive vessel before him. Its design was similar to the old-style ironclad vessels that frequently ply the waterways. Its sharply angled hull was pointed at the front and wide at the rear, its waterline and freeboard almost perpendicular to each other. Its hull was flat, lacking a keel. The welded rivets scattered across its surface proved its craftsmanship wasn't entirely superior to that of mortal craftsmen. Only during the hoisting, welding, and assembly phases did a large number of alchemical beasts replace human labor. Beyond that, no other work required the involvement of spellcasters, Harvey explained modestly. But no one would have believed that the other kingdoms in the southern territories were capable of producing such an oppressive ironwork. Even if they possessed patents for using magic power to replace sail propulsion, ordinary kingdoms simply couldn't muster the vast quantities of refined steel required to build a ship. Only a nation like Spark City, with its vast and advanced heavy industry as its foundation and its application of magic to every aspect of its manufacturing, could have built a war machine comparable to the Lizardman's floating island fortress. Fadden swallowed his saliva and said dryly, "You plan to let the spellcaster drive this huge steel ship directly from the Glacier River into the Great Bear Lake, and then smash the enemy's floating island number 3, the place where they were standing at the moment was right in front of the warship." The huge metal ramp cast as a hole on the bow could not help but make the foreign spellcasters of the Federation think a lot. Clash? Mr. Fadden, are you kidding? Harvey chuckled. A second-generation ironclad warship is only 120 meters long and only about 15 meters wide at its widest point. Its overall characteristics are speed and maneuverability. How could it possibly go head-to-head with a floating island? He then led everyone onto the ship's deck and, gesturing to the workers busy completing outfitting work, explained, "The second-generation ironclad warship will be equipped with 4 magic power cores. Fully loaded, it can reach a top speed of 30 kilometers per hour, more than double the speed of an ordinary civilian ironclad ship." Furthermore, Harvey had loaded it with the most important weaponry, 4 fixed anti-aircraft beam cannons, 4 large-caliber magic energy naval cannons, side-mounted machine gun arrays, and even a small airship landing platform at the rear end of the deck. "We can launch 2 new ironclad warships in as little as 3 days. After another half-day of actual commissioning, we can immediately set sail for Great Bear Lake." Chapter 581. A long-awaited meeting. Seraph and Dawson slowly paced the deck of the ironclad warship, occasionally chatting cordially with the outfitting workers and occasionally asking questions of Harvey, who had accompanied them throughout the entire process. The 2 legendary mages were feeling a mix of emotions. Ironclad ships had been around for over a year, and recently, they had become ubiquitous on the southern inland waterways. Most people knew that these were magical, unsailable vessels, entirely cast from steel and propelled by magical energy. While everyone believed that the ironclad's core technology and greatest advantage lay in its groundbreaking magical power, the reality before them proved otherwise. Spark City relied not solely on its monopoly on magical energy. Even without a magical power core, the material required simply to weld together large quantities of standardized steel plates would have been astronomical. The southern kingdoms were filled with countless iron-rich kingdoms, and the pig iron produced by the mines was not a scarce commodity. A cartload of pig iron ingots brought to a blacksmith's shop would fetch no more than 1 gold pound. Once forged into steel by a skilled blacksmith, the price could be 5 to 10 times higher. Only by commissioning an alchemist to incorporate magical minerals and repeatedly refine the iron could a high price be achieved. However, this process was complex and extremely time-consuming. Even a workshop staffed by an alchemist, operating year-round, could only forge a dozen or so suits of fine steel armor and an equal number of refined weapons. Even if all these people were to gather together and devote years to the work, they would not be able to create the giant steel ship before them. Watching the ordinary workers on the deck, carrying the mechanical box containing the soul core tuner and skillfully manipulating the alchemic beasts to climb high and low, the Union spellcasters felt a mixture of irony and bitterness. At that moment, the status of the Transcendent seemed to have lost its noble undertone, making them seem like an insignificant presence within this vast shipyard. After leaving the warship port, everyone sat in silence in the alchemic carriage. Halfway back, Harvey suddenly received a report from his personal guards. "Your Majesty, word has come from Grizzly Castle that the mages from Black Rock City will arrive in the north in 2 hours. The leader of the mages, Mr. Phil Holden, who claims to be your close friend, has asked if you will personally go to Central Station to greet them." Harvey coughed awkwardly and glanced sideways at Chief Dawson beside him. He hadn't even taken the time to greet the Union chief when he arrived in Spark City. If he nodded now, wouldn't it seem disrespectful to the legendary mage? Dawson, unconcerned, smiled and said, "Your Majesty, please go. I haven't seen that fair in over a year, so I'm happy to accompany you." Seraph, who had been sitting sternly beside Harvey, suddenly snorted and asked, "Your Majesty, shouldn't flying within Spark City be prohibited for spellcasters, as long as it's just within the inner city, and not near my castle or the air defense areas on the city walls? Then theoretically it's not prohibited," Harvey replied, stunned. Before he finished speaking, Seraph took off, flying straight towards the Federation building without looking back, leaving everyone present stunned. "Ahem. This old guy is a little embarrassed, Your Majesty, please don't mind." Dawson touched his nose and explained patiently, "He and Fair have had a bad relationship for nearly 10 years, and they have always tried not to see each other." Harvey nodded in understanding. He had heard some things when he went to the Magic City, but he still didn't know the details. Naturally, his gossip heart was burning, and he asked with a smile, "Why is this so?" "Mr. Fair himself has no stain, and treats people warmly and directly. I heard that when he was stationed in the Evil Moon Mountains, he was also one of the wizard leaders with an outstanding record. He should not bring shame to Lord Salus, right? This is related to the factional struggles among the orthodox wizards in the south, and the blood scandals of several ancient wizard families. Your Majesty, please don't ask about it. I can't casually disclose the personal privacy of a legendary spellcaster." Harvey shrugged and wisely chose to keep quiet. When everyone arrived at the central station outside the south gate, a group of battle mages led by Stormwalker Matthews Willie had already gotten off the train one after another, and were standing on the platform with their luggage and suitcases, greeting the station officials. "Mr. Willie," Harvey called out loudly, slowly approached and smiled, "on behalf of Spark City, I welcome you all to the north." Stormwalker turned his head and immediately noticed that next to the strange young man in fancy clothes who greeted him was the short and slightly bald Chief Dawson. He quickly bowed and saluted, "Greetings, Your Majesty Harvey, and Your Excellency Dawson. Please forgive me. I couldn't stop Fair from making the rude request that His Majesty the Emperor come to greet us in person." Dawson rolled his eyes and muttered, "Who can stop him? We said we would arrive in 3 days at the earliest. How come you came so quickly?" Matthew's mouth twitched, and he forced a wry smile and said, "We originally arrived in Fingigan City yesterday and planned to rest for a day before setting off north." Fair was so impatient that he demanded in a tough attitude that the officials of Fingigan City Hall urgently dispatched ships for us and insisted on arriving at Grizzly Castle overnight, but sailing north was against the current, and even at full steam, ironclad ships still had to consider safety during nighttime navigation. The overwhelmed transportation officials had no choice but to mobilize all 5 of Fingigan City's airships. Only then did they manage to reach their destination, carrying nearly 100 battle mages, through the night. Harvey glanced around, puzzled, "But why haven't I seen any of Mr. Fell's men?" Matthews removed his hat and said awkwardly, "After arriving at Grizzlyburg, he learned that we'd need to ride your magic-powered train through the tunnels beneath the Sacred Spine Mountains to enter the north, and suddenly, ahem, he got excited and insisted on using his flying magic to cross the Sacred Spine Mountains and compete with the train. It would have been better if he hadn't explained." As Stormwalker spoke, the battle mages gathered around him, each turning their heads in embarrassment, likely speechless at their leader's erratic behavior. Matthews quickly added, "Please don't mind. Fair is also testing his newly modified high-ring flying technique. If nothing goes wrong, he should be able to reach." Before he could finish his words, the guards scattered around the platform, responsible for clearing the platform and security, suddenly pulled out their weapons from their waists and pointed them at the sky with nervous expressions. A figure wrapped in blazing flames, accompanied by a thunderous roar, fell from the sky and slammed heavily into an open space in the station dozens of meters away from Harvey, causing the people around to scream and take cover. Ha ha ha. Damn it. Why can't I outrun this heavy iron lump that can only run on the ground? Mr. Kelthuzid. My old friend. How long have we not seen each other? Harvey looked closely and saw a familiar face with torn clothes and a disheveled figure standing in a large crater not far away. He had short, standing crimson hair, a sturdy build, and a strong, well-built figure, but his face was a little pale, and a hint of sweat was visible on his forehead, as if the high-speed flight had almost completely burned out his magic power. Wasn't this our son of fire, Mr. Verholden, whom I hadn't seen for a long time? Chapter 582, Castle Banquet. At nightfall, the king's castle was ablaze with lights. Guards were stationed closely around the structure, while teams of waiters and servants bustled busily through it. The banquet hall on the castle's first floor was bustling with activity. Hundreds of softly illuminated magic stone lamps hung from the ceiling, replacing candles and torches for illumination. A variety of drinks and exquisite cuisine complemented the long dining tables. Spellcasters from the Union, dressed in formal attire, gathered in groups of 3 or 5, whispering to each other and commenting on the feast's offerings. Harvey felt that a social gathering, accompanied by conversation, would foster closer ties between the Union's mages and the kingdom's high command, rather than a dull, formal meeting. After all, with war imminent, it would be better to warm up the atmosphere and allow for easier communication after familiarity, rather than forcing them to split into 2 factions and engage in formal confrontation. Regardless of their faction, spellcasters are generally self-disciplined, and not many of them prefer drinking and pleasure. Despite this, facing the banquet carefully prepared by the Imperial chef team, these unprecedented delicacies and fine wines served made them unable to help but reach out again and again, and taste them with great interest. Tisk tisk tisk, brewing fine wine with potion ingredients, I dare say no one except you can do it. Fell picked up the wine glass handed by the waiter, drank it all in a heroic gulp, smacked his lips and admired. I didn't expect that a spellcaster like me would also be naive. Harvey shrugged, waved his hand to reject the Son of Flame's invitation to drink, and smiled. They all say that Spark City is the second magic capital, the new Alea rising in the north. What do you think of this? A conservative and old-fashioned place like Alea is nothing compared to this place. Fell picked up a piece of candied fruit pulp and put it into his mouth, squinting and smiling. If it were those magic politicians in Alea who asked me to rush back day and night to report on my work, I would just think they were talking nonsense. He paused, leaned close to Harvey's ear and whispered, "This time, Chief Gallagher personally nodded and allowed us to rush to the north to join your new federation as individuals. Is it because the northern alien races are about to make a big move? Is it because the northern alien races are about to make a big move? Yes, we are about to launch a military operation against them, and we will need to rely on your mage corps in many areas." Stormwalker, who had been listening intently, asked hurriedly, "How do you want us to act specifically? I heard that His Majesty also has a full-fledged group of combat mages under his command. Do we just need to cooperate with them?" The Son of Flame seemed to have inquired about a lot of inside information before coming. Hearing this, he curled his lips and said, "Speaking of your mortal soldiers who use magical weapons, I do admire their combat effectiveness and discipline, but your mage corps is not so good. I heard that it was a group of research mages who came here bravely, right?" Harvey smiled bitterly and said, "You really have found out everything, and it is indeed the case. Most of the people in my magic academy and spellcaster school are research mages. It is indeed a bit too much to ask them to control airships and fight against a demon lizardman." These words subtly praised the Federation's mage corps, instantly bringing a smile to Fair's face. He said cheerfully, "Don't worry. Among the over 100 battle mages we're dispatching this time, there are full 10 of them at the highest level. The remaining mid-level mages are veterans of long battles and will definitely not lag behind." He rubbed his hands together excitedly, his eyes eagerly muttering, "I've been wanting to see the magical weapons you've developed for a long time." Besides the gun of annihilation, you must have quite a few new gadgets, right? Magic-powered cannons, long-range beam weapons, and that one-shot kill, what's it called? A magic sniper rifle. Harvey waved his hand helplessly, chuckling. At tomorrow's special military operations conference, you'll see for yourself the various weapons that will be used in battle. But before that, I thought it would be best for you to familiarize yourself with the combat methods of those alien enemies and the peculiar individual characteristics. He then waved, calling over Vaughn, the orc officer who had been following him nearby, and introduced him. Come meet my capable subordinate, Colonel Vaughn, and the first commander of this military operation, orc. The two Union battle mages exchanged a strange look. The Son of Fire unabashedly pulled Harvey aside and frowned, saying, "My dear friend, you have no other high-level spellcasters under your command? Wolfwalker, Eye of Illusion, and Astrologer, they are all well-known figures in the North, but they have no experience in leading armies in battle, and the organizational structure of spellcasters and mortal armies is very different. The combat coordination and tactical scheduling of the soldiers require an experienced commander to take charge." Harvey was well aware of his old friend's doubts and concerns. An orthodox wizard like him, who is accustomed to the superior status of spellcasters, naturally could not obey the orders of a strange alien officer at will. In addition, he was frank and direct in his dealings. Unless Harvey personally accepted the title of Commander-in-Chief, it would be difficult for anyone else to be convinced immediately. Vaughn, standing aside, was already filled with dissatisfaction. This Union mage from the Southern Territory not only considered himself a friend of His Majesty, but also acted in an extremely rude and impolite manner, and had no due respect or self-awareness for His Majesty. Now, he even dared to openly oppose His Majesty's will in front of him. He endured it again and again, but finally couldn't bear it any more and pressed the hilt of the sword with one hand. He stepped forward and said gloomily, "Mr. Fair, are you questioning His Majesty's arrangements in public?" Fair raised his eyebrows, chuckled and said, "Bloodline warrior, I am talking to the ancestor you are loyal to." "It is not your turn to interrupt." Vaughn's face froze and he could not hide his anger. He was about to explode on the spot, but when he looked up, he saw His Majesty winking at him calmly. Suddenly, a gentle voice rang in his mind, "Don't bother with this guy, I will find a way to persuade him to obey your command." Step back. Even if Vaughn is an extraordinary warrior who has awakened a high-level bloodline, if he only relies on fists and close combat without using lethal weapons, he is no match for the Son of Fire. Harvey still has some judgment on this, and hurriedly stopped the two from provoking each other. After Vaughn retreated angrily, he turned to the Son of Fire and said sternly, "The commander of the operation was appointed by me personally. Mr. Fair, please don't make things too difficult for him for my sake." The Son of Fire spread his hands and said indifferently, "For your sake, I will give him due respect, but his command ability and combat strength remain to be verified. Except for you, I will not easily put my life in the hands of others." Stormwalker on the side shook his head and smiled bitterly, and gave Harvey an apologetic look. Chapter 583 Battle Plan. This is the specific battle plan, everyone. Next we will discuss the details of the operation. Please feel free to ask if you have any questions. Harvey put down the documents in his hand, pressed his palms on the table, looked around with a firm gaze, and said in a steady tone, "Without a doubt, the first thorn who jumped out must be Mr. Son of Flame." He gently closed the tactical report in his hand, stood up and frowned. According to the strategy formulated by the military, the role of us combat mages who drive airships in the raid is, just as bait, it's both a bait and a sword that can make an effective counterattack when necessary. Harvey explained patiently, taking into account the anti-aircraft attack means that must exist on floating island number 3, the airship cannot get close enough to bomb it. The magic lizardman's skin and shell have natural magic resistance. It is equally dangerous for the mages to leave the cover of the aerial vehicles and engage in ground combat. If they are not careful, this group of combat mages, who number no more than 100, will fall into an enemy formation that is dozens of times larger than their own. After all, the magic lizardman's black water can be replenished nearby at any time, and the caster's magic power cannot be fully restored in an instant. The Mage chapter's prized swarm spellcasting essentially required proximity to the floating island to be effective. Against the island's sturdy defenses, it offered no destructive impact, not to mention the demonic lizardman's ability to conjure black crystal shields. The only thing you can do is use your airships to lure away the majority of the winged ones, providing air cover for the shallow water heavy gunboats several miles away, tasked with carrying out targeted bombardments of the floating island, Vaughn said, his expression grim, as he pointed out the crux of the matter without mercy. Stormwalker pondered for a moment, then took the initiative to inquire, have any of our spellcasters ever engaged them head-on in battle before? Just how formidable is their bizarre anti-magic armor? Duncan, who sat below Harvey, sat up straight and spoke slowly. The 7th level creative attack spell, Arcane Storm, is nearly ineffective against them, and they are nearly immune to the necromancer's mid-level poison spells. But if we could destroy their armor with physical attacks, the magic resistance attached to their bodies would be greatly weakened. A single low-level magic missile would be enough to blast these creatures into dust. Eye of Illusion also deliberated for a moment, then added, Force Field magic can effectively defend against their black water attacks. Ice and fire elemental magic can freeze the enemy's body and slow them down, while fire magic can easily ignite liquid black water. It burns like kerosene. After 2 high-level battle mages came forward to testify, the Son of Flame immediately revealed a satisfied expression and nodded, so, these alien monsters are not completely invulnerable, and what I am best at, happens to be fire magic. As for the need to rely on physical attacks to achieve armor breaking in battle, Fell had a sinister smile on his face. His powerful body that had been transformed by magic was no less powerful than that of a bloodline warrior. Even with a fist as big as a sand bowl, it was enough to hammer those skin monsters into a bag of mud. After saying this, he raised his chin with some pride, raised his finger and pointed at Commander Vaughn, who was sitting upright opposite him, and chuckled, "There's nothing wrong with using us as bait, but Mr. Commander, when your mortal soldiers encounter trouble on the battlefield, don't forget to ask for help from us, the Celestial, bait, in time. Ask for help? The Northern Army has always rescued others. We have fought under your majesty for so long, and we have never encountered a situation where we needed a spellcaster to rescue us." Vaughn's face was a little gloomy, but he still suppressed his anger in front of Harvey and refuted in a deep voice. The Son of Flame scratched his head and curled his lips, saying, "That's true. After all, you only need to stay on the ironclad warship, hide a few miles away from the battlefield and fire a few shots. Maybe you won't even see the shadow of the demon lizardman from beginning to end." Harvey shook his head and reminded helplessly, "Mr. Fair, don't forget that once the floating island defenses are successfully blown up, the soldiers will also need to abandon the ship and land to engage in actual ground combat." Seeing that the situation suddenly became tense, Stormwalker hurried out to smooth things over. "Before that, we will try our best to annihilate the enemy's winged creatures, and clear a safe airspace for the soldiers fighting on the ground. After that," he paused, and said with a stiff smile, "Speaking of which, Your Majesty, you haven't invited us to visit your steel ship, and sent someone to teach us how to fly the new floating airship." Harvey immediately curled up the corners of his mouth when he heard this, and decisively changed the subject. "In that case, today's military meeting will come to an end for the time being. Anyway, the 2 chief ministers are not present, so I will take this opportunity to show you around the new ship." Though they had only arrived at the warship port a day later, thanks to the incredibly efficient work of the shipyard workers and alchemists, the entire ship's deck outfitting was already complete. Working through the night, the magical cannons and beam weapons that had been delivered ahead of time had also been assembled. When Harvey and his group of battle mages ascended the deck, the sight before them left them speechless. The Son of Fire, disregarding his appearance, walked to the side of the ship and gently tapped on it. As expected, the clanging of metal echoed. "Wow! Not only the entire hull, but even the sides are made of steel. How much fine steel did you use to build such a terrifying vessel? How heavy is it? How can it float so easily?" Actually, it was less than 5,000 tons, but this world didn't have such a unit of weight, and ordinary weight measurements hadn't developed a word to describe its size, just as most people in their previous lives could only use trillions to describe extreme quantities. Harvey could only smile and deceive. "The exact weight is not important. You just need to know that it can not only float easily on the water, but also has a speed nearly 5 times faster than traditional sailboats. It won't sink to the bottom, and it can sail very fast on the water." The Son of Fire seemed more and more outrageous as he thought about it. He was ready to take off into the air and dive into the water to find out what was going on. Who would have thought that Harvey was even quicker-eyed and quick-handed? The magician's hand instantly activated and grabbed his robe, saying with a smile, "Mr. Fair, I assure you, There is absolutely no magic circle engraved on the bottom of the ship. This ship was indeed cast by mortal craftsmen. Stormwalker looked embarrassed, and stepped forward to change the subject. The power source for the ship's navigation is the same as that of the airship. It also relies on the magic power core developed by your majesty, right? Harvey nodded and said, yes, the only difference is the number of loads. In order to reduce the load, the airship often only carries one core for energy supply, so the round-trip mileage must be strictly calculated for each operation. The shallow water heavy gunboat, thanks to its superior load-bearing performance, is enough to be equipped with 4 power cores, and can also carry enough liquid magic energy to support ocean voyages. Since more cores mean faster speed, why not install a few more? A ship this size could easily carry 10, no, even more. Then, maybe even this giant steel fortress could fly right above the water. Seeing the son of fire grow increasingly agitated, Harvey rolled his eyes helplessly again. He put his arm around his shoulders and whispered, my friend, I have to explain to you the principles of the magic power core's cooling system, and the potential risks of overheating and even explosion. Chapter 584 Assembly. Dave, a bulging briefcase tucked under his arm, single-handedly pushed open the door to the officers' club. The hall was buzzing with activity. Many junior officers, off-duty and on leave, gathered in groups around round tables, happily playing cards. Dave? Over here. Benny stood up from the card table in the corner and waved to his fellow countryman, an old friend. Dave squeezed through the crowd breathlessly and sat down in front of him, frowning and saying, you just got out of the barracks? Why haven't you even changed out of your military uniform? Benny grinned and said, why? After working in the city hall for so long, you've become bureaucratic. After that, he raised his left hand, winked at Dave and made a gesture of rubbing his thumb and index finger, urging him repeatedly, hurry up and take out the good things you brought me. Dave rolled his eyes, took out a long paper bag from his briefcase, handed it to his old friend, and began to mutter, I've taken out all my share this month. You should smoke it sparingly. This stuff is not good for your health. Benny didn't care at all. He leaned closer through the paper bag and took a deep breath. He smiled and said, mint cigarettes are good things, but it's a pity you don't know how to enjoy them. This stuff is much higher grade than the roasted cigarettes issued by the army, and it is more refreshing. It is the real hard currency when soldiers are on night patrols and going out to fight. Tisk. I knew you wouldn't listen. The medical center has been seeing a lot of coughing patients lately. They've been vaccinated, but their condition hasn't improved. Doctors are speculating that it's caused by excessive smoking. The highest rates of symptoms are in the military and factories. Benny twirled his sleeves and was about to say something when the alchemical horn hanging in a corner of the club hall suddenly blared. The blaring blast was so rapid that the soldiers in the hall jumped to their feet. Oh no. It's an emergency call to action. Benny quickly pulled a folded piece of paper from his uniform pocket, thrust it into Dave's hands, and hurried to the door. In less than half a minute, Dave and a few waiters were the only ones left in the club hall, staring at each other in bewilderment. Finally, he came to his senses and unfolded the paper in his hand. Written on it were a string of shaky numbers, Benny's registered bank account. Everyone, listen up. The 1st Independent Regiment of the Northern Frontier Army. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Battalions, Operation Codename, Bear Hunt, Classification, Confidential, Assembly Deadline, 3 hours. Stand ready at the East Coast Naval Port, ready to move at any time. The commander, standing on the podium, gave the assembly order in a concise and clear manner. The lower-level MCOs, upon receiving the order to disperse, each received a list of tasks from their respective superiors. Benny clutched the order tightly and hurried back to battalion headquarters. The soldiers had already received the notice, and it took only half an hour to assemble. Unlike in the past, when facing urgent military missions, ordinary soldiers no longer had to worry about weapons, ammunition, and logistics. Once the assembly call sounded, the logistics department was fully prepared. They only had to collect their combat weapons in a specified time and check their ammunition, medical kits, and 3 days of emergency rations for field operations. The excess supplies were likely loaded onto the ship yesterday. As soon as the soldiers arrive, fully equipped, the entire army can launch an attack. Military deployments and movements often don't pass directly through the city walls. This is partly to prevent gossip and rumors from spreading among the populace, and partly because the large number of troops makes it difficult for military carts to navigate the relatively narrow streets. By the time the last assembled troops arrived at the warship port, the sun had already set slightly. The warm, red spring sun hung high above the distant hills, reflecting a dazzling golden light off the steel-forged shallow-water gunboats. "Captain, is this the legendary shallow-water heavy gunboat? It's truly magnificent. More than an order of magnitude larger than an ordinary military ironclad." The new recruits, standing on the dock, gazed up at the massive ship anchored not far away and exclaimed in a low voice. Benny was also inexplicably shocked, but he maintained his captain's dignity, frowning and saying, "Shut up. No private conversation." Only when it was his squadron's turn to officially board the ship did the young officer finally open his mouth slightly. This wasn't just any massive ironclad ship, it was a truly mobile war fortress. 4 anti-aircraft beam cannons, capside-on capstans, were mounted on the bow and stern. 4 large-caliber naval guns were arrayed on either side of the hull, and arrays of magical machine guns were mounted on the flanks. Behind the observation tower was even a small landing platform large enough to accommodate 3 airships. The bridge, located in the middle and rear of the ship, was fully enclosed. Standing on the deck, one could feel a slight vibration coming from below. Needless to say, the magical power core in the engine room was undergoing activation and warm-up. A naval officer with the rank of second lieutenant on his chest hurried forward, holding the roll call list in his hand and said loudly, "Captain Benny of the 3rd Squadron of the 2nd Battalion, immediately go to the number 2 cabin on the lower level and stand by." Benny was stunned for a moment, and asked dryly, "Sir, the official departure time, in half an hour." The sun sets at the military airship landing and takeoff field behind the military camp. Harvey led a team of personal guards and stood in the center, and instructed the burly fire mage Phil Holden, Mr. "Phil, please be sure to follow instructions. The key to this battle lies in whether your airship squadron can successfully attract the attention of the enemy's air force." The son of fire waved his hand impatiently and said in a rough voice, "All right, Mr. Harvey, His Majesty the Emperor. You have been whispering in my ear for an hour. Have the ground troops boarded the ship and set sail?" Harvey took out his pocket watch and took a look at it. He said helplessly, "They set off 3 hours ago." Compared to the speed of airships, warships travel significantly slower in rivers, so after you arrive at the designated assembly point 100 miles away from Great Bear Lake, you must not alert the enemy first, and wait patiently for the ground troops to arrive and reunite. Before he could finish, the Son of Flame automatically recited the rest of the text, after joining up with the ground forces. The advanced soldiers will march quickly at night to the south side of Big Bear Lake and set up a defensive line to block the enemy. After all preparations are complete, the airship squadron can take off and approach the floating island, using beam weapons to fire the first shot of the decoy operation. Harvey nodded with a wry smile and added, "Please be sure not to separate from the main force and act alone. This is not a decapitation operation. Our ultimate goal is to completely defeat the enemy, destroy their floating islands to the maximum extent possible, and annihilate their living forces." Fair curled his lips and chuckled, "Of course I understand. This way we can also compete with the ground forces in kill records and see who is the real combat ace." After that, he couldn't help rubbing his hands and muttering, "Colonel Vaughn, I hope he won't let me down." Chapter 585 Seizing the Opportunity. 750 miles northwest of the capital, on the outskirts of the Great Bear Lake Swamp, lies the Dove and Heron Forest. The advance reconnaissance team named this area, nestled in the heart of the wilderness, due to the large population of waterfowl there. The night was dark, and the dew had soaked the already damp earth, making it even softer. Every step sank to the bottom of the feet, slowing the soldiers' march to an unusually slow pace. Benny gritted his teeth and pulled his legs out of the mud. He turned to look at the soldiers behind him, raised his arms and waved them forward, gesturing to continue advancing. The moonlight was almost completely obscured by the dense canopy of trees overhead, but they dared not use any lighting equipment, naturally because of the occasional sound of wings flapping through the wind overhead, the movement of sporadic winged creatures patrolling the surrounding area at night. The 2nd Battalion's mission was to establish a horizontal, intersecting defensive line within a 10-mile radius of the enemy floating island, effectively blocking the main exit from Great Bear Lake to the glacial river. By deploying portable artillery and machine gun arrays, they would be in a position of maximum advantage against any ground attack. However, establishing a defensive line under the watchful eyes of the lizardmen was not as simple as imagined. The alien enemies on floating island number 3 were extremely active. They not only burned the lakeshore, but also opened up a wide field of view for miles around the floating island, making hiding impossible. The winged beings also took on aerial patrol duties, scouting out to a distance exceeding 10 miles. Therefore, to avoid exposure, the 2nd Battalion, as the advance force, had to completely abandon the support of the alchemy beasts and march entirely on foot through the Heron Forest, carrying all ammunition, supplies, and military materiel entirely by manpower. Junior officers like Benny led by example, leading the charge, carrying nearly 30 kilograms of loads. Looking at Captain Newman's slightly hunched figure, Benny shook his head, reached out and unhooked an external ammunition belt from the backpack behind him, slinging it onto his tactical belt. The captain relaxed, instinctively turning to look at his young subordinate. A slight frown crossed his face, a reproachful expression on his face, but he didn't reprimand. The silent march forbade soldiers from making any noise other than movement, let alone speaking. Even their magical weapons were to be completely deactivated to prevent the winged lizardmen from sensing their magical fluctuations. As dawn approached, the troops finally arrived at their designated location. After the commander gave the order to rest and prepared to deploy their lines, the soldiers, who had been silent all night, slumped against the tree trunks, their suppressed gasps echoing. A new recruit, slumped beside Benny, instinctively rubbed his aching feet and was about to loosen his leg bindings when Benny brushed his arm away and stopped them with a stern expression. Although the military doctor repeatedly reminded the soldiers of a battlefield lesson often only veterans value, removing the leg bandages immediately after a long, loaded march can cause intense soreness in already congested legs, and in severe cases, can even cause stress symptoms such as fainting. Seeing the silence finally lifted, Benny leaned over to the new recruit and whispered, "Don't be foolish if you don't want your legs to be crippled." Wait a quarter of an hour before loosening the bandages. The new recruit, startled, quickly drew his water bottle from his waist and gulped down a specially prepared sugar salt solution. Several parallel T-shaped trenches were quickly dug under the vigorous blows of the engineer's shovel. As the sun rose above the treetops, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard again from behind. It was the delayed arrival of the bloodline warriors from the Special Operations Team. Seeing these extraordinary individuals carrying massive ammunition crates half a man's height on their backs, all the soldiers gasped in amazement. Just by looking at how deep the ammunition boxes sank into the ground, one could tell that these supplies weighed at least 100 kilograms. In addition, the bloodline warriors also needed to carry heavy weapons such as portable artillery. Although they set out nearly 4 hours later than the advance battalion, they arrived less than 2 hours late. Captain Wolfhead. What are the latest orders from the rear ship command? Wolfhead pulled disassembled gun parts from his waist pouch and deftly assembled them while speaking in a deep voice. Wait here. The airship squadron will arrive in 2 hours. We just need to wait for them to load the enemy over. They'll deal with the flying ones, and we'll take care of the running ones. Newman nodded and pointed to the unfolded tactical map. This area of Hukaukal is the only area where we've deployed our lines, making it easy for a large enemy force to penetrate. Concentrate our forces in trenches about 100 meters apart. As long as we have strong suppressive firepower, I can guarantee that not a single enemy will pass through here. He then raised his hand and pointed to a rubble-covered slope half a mile to the left, frowning and reminding, but there's also a mountain ravine here that can bypass the defenses and lead directly to our rear. Do you think we should send someone ahead, blow up the mountain entrance? Wolfhead raised an eyebrow and shook his head. That's too much of a fuss. We don't have heavy explosives with us. Ammunition is precious, and we can't waste it on something like blowing up the mountain. He summoned his deputy, Spider, and decisively ordered, send 20 special forces to hold the strategic position in that mountain stream and completely block the entrance. Spider nodded, turning to go and check the men. 20 special forces Transcendence can hold it? Captain. We only have 500 soldiers, plus the 50 or so bloodline warriors you brought with us. The enemy is nearly 10,000. Wolfhead narrowed his eyes and waved a reassuring hand. Don't worry. His Majesty customized the bolters for us. We brought them with us this time. A narrow mountain stream like this, even if they were filled with corpses, they wouldn't be able to squeeze in. The lower-ranking officers gathered nearby, envious at this. Bolters, rumored to be still in the experimental development stage, were already being used by the bloodline warriors. Son of Fire and Commander Vaughn stood side by side on the bridge, gazing at the dozens of airships ready for launch on the riverbank. The ammunition needed for beam weapons also serves as essential fuel for the airship. Regardless of the battle situation, we must consider a safe return. A forced landing in enemy territory is a sure death. Not all of the battle mages sent by the Federation are high-level, capable of autonomous flight. If the airship is damaged in battle, the mages will inevitably face the risk of a forced landing and crash, a situation that is often fatal. The fire mage chuckled and said calmly, "Colonel, our past experiences in Black Rock City were no less arduous than today. Spellcasters are not selfish and care about their lives. Casualties on the battlefield are normal, no different from ordinary soldiers." Vaughn glanced at Fell with some surprise and said gravely, "His Majesty does treat spellcasters and ordinary soldiers equally, but I still hope that while ensuring the completion of your mission, you will also consider your own safety." He paused, remembering Harvey's earnest instructions, and added, "Especially you, Mr. Fell. His Majesty personally instructed me to repeatedly remind you, not to get carried away in the heat of battle." Chapter 586 Medium-Range Bombing. The Son of Fire followed his airship as it slowly ascended into the sky, gazing down at the two massive steel warships below and the soldiers bustling about on their decks. This wasn't his first time fighting alongside mortals. Back in his early 20s, as a leading novice battle mage, he had accompanied the Union's predecessors to Black Rock City, charging into the bloody battles against the demons. The alliances of the southern realms were filled with spellcasters descended from wizard families, often bringing with them large retinues. Those feeble mortal soldiers were not foolish, often foreseeing their dire fate the moment they arrived at the Evil Moon Mountains. Fearing death and a sense of self-destruction, these mortals would indulge in pre-battle revelry, falling into a frenzy until the battle itself began. The alchemy quest even distributed cheap, short-acting frenzy potions to them, ensuring they wouldn't lose their swords when facing the demons. But here, Fair witnessed something entirely different. The tactical expertise and astonishing discipline displayed by these mortal soldiers. He had no doubt that every single one of these lowly soldiers would have commanded a small cavalry unit under the command of a noble lord from the southern kingdoms. They needed no incitement or inducement, no routine pre-deployment rewards, and no repeated lashings from military judges. Every soldier knew their place, and even when on standby, they remained focused on cleaning and adjusting their weapons. Mr. Fair. Ziz. Fair. Ziz. Sir, I hear you. Please answer. Colonel Vaughn's voice echoed through the airship's alchemical communication system, signaling the end of the military's silence and the official start of the operation. The Son of Fire pressed the button on his communicator and said in a deep voice, "Roger. We just flew over the blocking line at the mouth of the lake and are about to reach Great Bear Lake." Before a reply could arrive, a battle mage riding with Fair suddenly pointed northwest and exclaimed, "Captain Holden. Look, miles ahead." A vast expanse of lake and marsh came into view, like a giant silver mirror suddenly embedded in the dark green wasteland. The scenery was truly bizarre and magnificent. Even more shocking was the sudden rise of the massive, hill-like island in the center of the lake, seemingly incompatible with its surroundings. The surface of the floating island was towering and jagged, covered with dark, mossy growths. The portion above water alone was as large as Harvey's castle in Spark City. Fell narrowed his eyes, staring for a moment, muttering, "It's hard to believe they could manipulate such a massive floating island, navigating through the subterranean waterways and reaching this point." Just then, Vaughn's command finally came over the communicator. "Attention, all airship squadrons. Activate the decoy plan." 30 airships, all at full speed, lowered their altitude and speed, slanting downwards towards Great Bear Lake. Before they could even reach within 1,000 meters of the floating island, they were spotted by the numerous enemies active on the lake shore. Crystalline spears condensed from black water rained down into the air, but they couldn't even reach the bottom of the airships. Several spellcasters casually hurled a series of area of effect spells at the ground, knocking several of the demon lizardmen to the ground, and then watched them rise again. "Those disgusting hides truly possess exceptional resistance to magic," Fell sneered, reaching for his magic rifle from the weapon rack. It took him only 3 seconds to load and aim, and with a single shot, he shattered the crystal visor on the enemy's head. He then watched with satisfaction as the enemy slowly collapsed to the ground, seemingly decaying from within. "Inform everyone, conserve your mana reserves and use your magic rifles freely to kill and injure the enemy. We'll try to create some noise here on the riverbank to draw out the winged ones on the floating island. This way, They wouldn't have to take the enormous risk of approaching the floating island and facing the enemy's anti-aircraft blackwater jets. The battle mages were already skilled with the annihilation spears, and their accuracy with the magic rifles was naturally no less impressive. Sporadic gunfire echoed from the airship, and the gathered lizardmen on the ground fell to the ground one by one, as if being called upon. A few minutes later, the nearby floating island reacted. The battle mages watched as a vast, flower-shaped chasm suddenly opened from its roof, and a dense, dark cloud emerged, careening towards the lake shore. Approaching, they discovered that the cloud was actually countless winged beings, swarming like flies. The throbbing of their fleshy wings and the clashing sounds of their wings were incredibly harsh. Everyone retreat. Evacuate immediately to the blocking line, full speed, Fel commanded via his communicator the next second. Almost instantly, the trailing airships launched to counterattack with beam weapons. The winged beings, also charging forward, were slammed into the web of death woven by the scattered beams, shattering into tiny pieces of flesh and blood as they splattered to the ground. But even within those few minutes of delay, the three airships that had taken the lead in the counterattack were immediately surrounded by the enemy. The winged ones, clearly aware of the power of beam weapons, scattered and dodged nimbly, constantly circling the blind spots of the pods, unleashing black water and red light at the spellcasters within. Luckily, they were unfamiliar with the mechanics of the airship's operation and didn't immediately focus their attention on the inflated airbags, otherwise the trapped mages would have crashed. More winged ones bypassed a trapped airship, continuing to pursue the larger force nearby. Several high-level spellcasters, unable to bear it any longer, cast their flight spells back to rescue the enemy. The Mage chapter's combat tradition is one of collaboration and shared progress. Abandonment and betrayal are unacceptable. The Son of Fire kept looking back, repeatedly resisting the urge to return to the rescue and engage the enemy in close combat. As the leader of the decoy plan, he had to lead the airship squadron, lure the large group of winged ones to the designated ambush site, and then cooperate with the ground forces to completely eliminate them. At that moment, a faint rumble of thunder suddenly erupted from the distant sky. Looking up, the clouds and sunlight above remained unchanged. It wasn't a celestial anomaly. But the thunder grew closer, and Fel's ears only caught a whistling sound, like the air ripping apart. Then, a massive crimson fireball suddenly rose from the distant lake shore. The ground suddenly rippled outward from the explosion center like a tidal wave. The blast sweeping up dirt and debris, plowing the area hundreds of meters around. Fel closed his eyes in a pang of pain. The monocannon had missed its target. It was Avant's fault, that damned coward, for only daring to fire at the floating island from 10 miles away. If they had been as brave and fearless as the battle mages he led, they would have blasted the enemy's floating fortress to pieces. Before he could react, a second thunderclap arrived. A huge splash of water erupted from the lake's surface to the left of the floating island, clearly another miss. Then the whole sky suddenly boiled up, and one after another artillery shells whistled through the air, like a circle, and hit the floating island in the middle of the lake squarely. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 587, Blockade, Part 1. A streak of red light, the thickness of an arm, glided past the edge of the pod. The massive energy surge nearly knocked the airship off balance, forcing the mid-level mage piloting it to pull back on the control stick, rapidly raising the airship, which was hovering in front of the blocking line. The other three spellcasters quickly cranked a beam cannon's firing winch, decisively counterattacking the enemy hundreds of meters away. A resounding boom echoed nearby as another airship was tragically struck by the winged one's concentrated red beam. Its split airbags, pierced through from head to tail, collapsed, and tumbled to the ground. More and more high-level mages rushed out of their respective airships, desperately trying to rescue their downed comrades amidst the chaotic battle. The surging fire elemental magic within him made it difficult for Holden to calm down. After emptying his monogun's magazine once again, he finally couldn't help but crash out of the airship, transforming into a stream of blazing flames, sprinting straight towards the dense swarm of enemies. A stormwalker's loud shout reached his ears, but he could no longer care. The flame emblem on his robe blazed with blinding light, and a high-speed, air-piercing shriek pierced the battlefield. As he closed in on the enemy horde, Fell seemed to glimpse a single, enormous crimson hidden beneath the crystal visors on their heads. Bang! A thunderous explosion, comparable to a sonic boom, was followed by a continuous series of crackling crashes. Under the crushing force of the Eighth Ring's improved spell, Scorching Strike, the battle group of hundreds of winged ones was pierced through like a piece of soft butter by the single-handed fire mage. The scorching shield clinging to the Son of Fire's body shattered bones and limbs in the face of any enemy who encountered him head-on. Even those unfortunate enough to be brushed by him, their entire bodies instantly ignited, falling to the ground in a heap of rotting, charred corpses. The flame seemed to ignite on contact, unquenchable with the slightest touch. By the time Holden had pierced through the enemy's airborne formations and reached the rear of the lake, his nerves, which had just calmed down slightly from the battle, were instantly tense again. The floating island, seemingly shredded in half by the magical naval bombardment, had suddenly opened up again with countless cracks and fissures, and more winged creatures poured out. A quick glance revealed that there were more than 1,000 of them. Damn it! Isn't it said that a floating island fortress of this size can only withstand no more than 10,000 enemy combat units? The Son of Fire cursed through gritted teeth. How can there be so many winged creatures? Several explosions echoed from the ground behind him in the distance, and he instinctively turned to look. He saw that the soldiers in charge of the blocking line had detonated the remaining ammunition in the first forward trench and were slowly retreating along the pre-dug T-shaped trench towards the second predetermined defense line. Oh no! There were also quite a few demon lizardmen on the ground. The mortal soldiers' suppressive firepower couldn't completely contain them. The Hucalcul seemed to be showing signs of being untenable. A figure instantly flew to the side of the fire mage. It was Stormwalker, who had just tried to stop him. Fair curled his lips and sneered. What? You finally can't bear it anymore and plan to come out and fight them in close combat? Stormwalker didn't respond, frowned and said, the reason why the ground forces can't suppress the enemy's offensive is all because we can't entangle these disgusting flying insects, allowing them to seize the opportunity to cast cluster lightning at the ground. Although he was very reluctant to admit it, the Son of Fire still sighed lightly and cheered up. There's still a chance to save the situation. The remaining airships have blocked the first wave of winged creatures in front of the front line. Summon all the high-level ones to join us. We are responsible for blocking the second wave of insects coming out of the floating island. The machine gun team continued to fire without interruption, and the dense gunfire resounded through the trenches. The swarming demon lizardmen fell one after another like cutting wheat, but the subsequent enemies did not seem to be afraid at all, and they still advanced slowly in an extremely dense formation. Blackwater spears and red lightning bolts flew at him from time to time, forcing the soldiers to stop firing and hide in the trenches in a panic. A red light slammed heavily on the edge of the trench, directly causing the bunker filled with mud and gravel to collapse. A large amount of mud and sand poured into Benny's mouth, who had just raised his head and was about to shout out orders. Pooh. Pooh. Ugh. Benny choked and coughed violently, lowering his head and spitting a large mouthful of saliva on the ground. Fire. 3 volleys. Give the machine gun team time to reload. The soldiers who received the order stood up one after another, lying on the trenches and roaring as they emptied their magazines, and directly mowed down the dozens of enemies who had broken away from the enemy position and rushed within 50 meters of the defense line. Too many. Captain. There are too many of them, the recruit shouted at Benny in a trembling voice as he reloaded his gun. We only have 1 battalion, how can we hold this? Benny raised his hand and slapped the recruit on the forehead, cursing, bullshit. Focus on shooting, aim for their heads and hit them hard. When this is over, if I find any bullets left in your ammunition box, I'll stuff them all back into your ass. Behind him, a whooshing sound broke through the air. It was the portable artillery on the third line of defense that was unleashed. A shell slammed squarely into the enemy clump, crushing the tightly huddled lizardmen into a scattering mass of blood and flesh. In the chaos, Benny even saw a broken crystal visor flying straight towards him and lodging in the mud less than 20 meters from the trench. Several more shells exploded, sending more enemies careening and falling. The air was thick with a stench of rust, causing the soldiers to frown even from a distance of dozens of meters. The relentless bombardment, accompanied by the roar of machine gun fire that echoed throughout the battlefield, made the short distance of less than 50 meters seem like an impassable barrier, preventing the enemy, huddled at the mouth of the call, from moving even a single step. Someone kicked a heavy ammunition box to Benny's feet, just enough to relieve his nearly empty reserve. He turned to see Battalion Commander Newman, his face covered in blood, grinning at him. "Commander, are you wounded?" One of the unfortunate soldiers got grazed on the head by a shattered spear fragment, and blood splattered all over my face. Newman ordered without further ado, his voice gravely indifferent. "Keep firing, their attack has clearly slowed." "Yes, sir." Benny turned, gripping his weapon tightly and preparing to continue the fight, when suddenly, several bright flashes of light appeared in the sky above him. When he subconsciously looked up and saw clearly, he felt that his breathing had stopped. The attack of the winged ones, he almost used up all his strength and roared to warn the soldiers around him, "Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Get into the trenches!" The expected explosion did not occur, but instead there was a burst of chaos and wailing behind him. "Oh no! It's the artillery position!" A soldier turned his head and immediately exclaimed. Benny came to his senses in an instant and found that most of the portable artillery had indeed misfired, and the enemy in front was accelerating forward again. "Retreat! Abandon the first line of defense, everyone retreat! Protect the artillery crew!" The battalion commander's order quickly reached his ears. Chapter 588, Blockade, Part 2. Benny, retreating to the second line of defense, instinctively turned his head, his heart sinking. The artillery positions behind the defenses lay in ruins, their beam lightning striking with near-penetrating precision, leaving craters everywhere. In the worst-hit area, a lightning strike on an ammunition crate had caused a secondary detonation, snapping two stout trees on one side of the position. Flames and smoke filled the air, and many men lay motionless on the ground. The screams and groans of the wounded could be vaguely heard. "Don't stop firing. Return to your positions. Don't let them get close to the trenches," Battalion Commander Newman's hoarse roar echoed again. Benny gritted his teeth, forcing himself to ignore his wounded comrades in the rear. He regrouped his squad and opened fire again at the slowly approaching enemy. Several tangled figures plummeted from the sky, breaking through the dense canopy and slamming diagonally into the trench. A closer look revealed a battle mage and three winged ones, who held him in a strangled grip. The high-altitude fall crushed the enemies beneath the caster, breaking bones and tendons. Benny seized the opportunity to strike with a sniper rifle, aiming a sniper rifle at the target whose arms were strangling the mage's neck, silently cracking his skull. The battle mage kicked the lifeless enemy aside, rising shamblingly. He raised his hand and gave a thumbs up to the soldier lying in the trench. Benny was shocked to see the man's face clearly. The skin beneath his robes was as hard and uneven as rock, giving him the appearance of a cold, stone sculpture. There were even spiderweb-like cracks on his neck and shoulders, indicating that the fall had taken its toll. "It's a dastardly mage," Benny muttered to himself, recalling the lessons he had learned in officer education class. The battle raged for nearly an hour, and the demon lizardmen clearly realized that their greatest threat lay in the relentless long-range weapons launched from the distant skies. Even the vastness of the floating island and its sturdy outer shells could not withstand this relentless bombardment. The soldiers entrenched in the valley at the lake's mouth reinforced their certainty that the terrifying long-range weapons lay hidden behind them. By mustering all their strength to break through the defenses, they could halt the humans' long-range offensive and destroy the powerful weapons they relied on, completely shattering their will to fight. Consequently, many winged beings abandoned the aerial engagement and descended directly on the blocking lines hidden in the dense forest, intending to leverage their air superiority and collaborate with their ground comrades to directly break through the defenses. Their primary targets, naturally, were the artillerymen manning the strange, thick iron tubes behind the ordinary soldiers. If these weapons landed in their own territory, they would instantly detonate violently, causing massive casualties among their own kind. A winged being had just landed on the ground when it raised its hand and instantly conjured a crystal shield, deflecting a bullet fired from the side. The attacker was an ordinary human soldier. These beings wielding metal weapons terrified them even more than spellcasters, and they would strike a fatal blow if they saw the right opportunity. With one hand raised, it summoned a burst of red lightning, ready to strike. A thick plate of metal armor suddenly flew diagonally, blocking the desperate soldier. The red light struck the armor, shattering it, but its own momentum was also reduced, allowing the target to roll and dodge. Before the winged being could react, a flash of cold light, accompanied by a sharp sound of breaking wind, pierced its ribs. It quickly condensed black water in its palm, reached down, and grasped the opponent's weapon. Turning back, it prepared to fire back a burst of red light, but turned to see the black muzzle of a gun pointed at it. Bang! The winged creature, whose head was completely shattered, stiffened his body and fell heavily to the ground. Wolf had lifted the barrel of his gun and blew a breath, then smiled at the battle mage in the back who had just finished preparing to cast a spell. Mage, stop chanting. I've already dealt with the enemy. The spellcaster awkwardly restrained his magic power, walked forward and asked doubtfully, this is not a revolver, nor is it a regular model of magic gun. Is this a special weapon customized by His Majesty the Emperor for his bloodline followers? You really know the goods. This is a grenade launcher, 3 times the power, 3 times the caliber. Of course, the price is 3 times the weight. Ordinary soldiers can't carry it at all. It's not an exaggeration to say that His Majesty tailored it for us. The battle mage nodded, a hint of envy on his face, then turned his head to look up at the sky, frowned and said, the bait plane has lost its effect. They have begun to notice the existence of the gunboats in the rear and plan to gather troops to break through our defense line. Wolf had also observed intently for a moment, and said in a deep voice, it doesn't matter. We have bought the gunboats nearly an hour of bombing time. The part of floating island number 3 that is exposed above the water has been almost flattened. The result is exactly as expected. As for those who had pursued from the floating island and had their lairs destroyed mid-flight, let the Northern Army engage them in the fair, open, positional battle. For Holden's left eye glowed a dark gold as he controlled a massive, 10-meter-long flaming python with both hands. This magical creature, formed purely from the magical energy of the fire element, seemed to come alive, encircling dozens of winged ones and trapping them mid-air. The enemies trapped within the python's circle did not give up their resistance. From time to time, several red beams shot out from the curtain of flames, striking the son of fire in the direction of his suspended position. Most of these he managed to dodge with distraction, while a few struck him directly. His high-ring flame shield, combined with his demonically transformed flesh and blood, allowed him to withstand numerous direct blows. Even when the shaky shield seemed poised to shatter, the Stormwalker fighting alongside him always managed to deliver a precise, deadly ice spike at the crucial moment. As the fiery python gradually closed in on the encirclement, the enemies within were either scorched to death by the inextinguishable elemental flames or pierced through the skin by sudden arrows. Enemies continued to plummet from the sky, but more winged beings chose to fly cautiously around them, darting straight into their rear without a glance. 10 high-level battle mages were simply too difficult to intercept over 1,000 winged beings in mid-air. The demon lizardman's exceptionally high magic resistance, when matched against the caster's agile and cunning attacks, presented an unsolvable dilemma of mutual restraint. For a short period, neither side was able to defeat the other. Aside from ice and fire magic, all other high-level attacks can be largely neutralized by them. The 10 of us alone are no match for these monsters. Stormwalker raised his hand and unleashed a frost tornado, blowing the winged one charging towards him far away. Let's retreat too, back to the defensive positions established by the soldiers, and fight alongside them. Fell didn't respond immediately, listening intently for a moment. The bombardment from the heavy gunboats seemed to have subsided temporarily, but Vaughn had warned him that after each round of bombardment, the guns needed approximately 10 minutes to cool down to prevent explosions. Therefore, they needed to use these intervals to fend off the enemy's redoubled attacks. This was when the portable artillery stationed behind the defenses would come into play. Wait? He seemed to have heard no artillery fire for ages. Chapter 589 Reinforcements. Z. Commander, Z. Calling for naval gunfire support, Z. The alchemical communicator in the command room intermittently transmitted a call for help from the front lines. Frequent energy interference indicated that the advance battalion's defensive lines were under heavy enemy attack. Vaughn's face was grim as he stood silently, his eyes fixed on the busy soldiers on deck. How long will it take for the guns to cool down? The adjutant replied gravely, Sir, we can launch a second round of bombardment in as little as 3 minutes. The signalman removed his headset and reported, Commander, the advance battalion is not only calling for artillery support, but also for reinforcements. The number of demon lizardmen appearing on floating island number 3 is far greater than we anticipated. The airship squadron's decoy plan hasn't been fully effective. The enemy seems to have discovered our medium-range bombing strategy. Their response, naturally, was a frantic, reckless assault on the defensive lines, attempting to break through and cut off the source of the Northern Army's bombardment. City Hall and the military overestimated the spellcaster's power against the demonic lizardmen. A mere 100 or so battle mages facing tens of thousands of alien monsters, no matter how powerful each individual was, could not possibly achieve a one-sided crushing victory. This war of aggression launched by a race whose individuals possessed extraordinary powers was no longer the simple regional conflict between humans and demons over resources. Even His Majesty himself had been misled by the ideas of the spellcasters, who comprised a significant portion of the kingdom's higher-ranking officials, and still held the stereotype that spellcasters would be the leaders of this war. No. I shouldn't have questioned His Majesty's decisions like that. Vaughn shook his head in annoyance, suppressing his deep-seated doubts once again. He reached into his arms, and felt something smooth yet unusually hard. Before setting out on the expedition, His Majesty summoned him to the castle alone and personally handed him a soul crystal. Vaughn had no idea where this item came from, and His Majesty had never mentioned it to anyone else, only saying it was the result of his ongoing private research, unofficially released. His Majesty also briefly explained its specific effects. In times of difficulty, use bloodline power to activate it and attempt to issue commands to the dormant alchemical beasts beneath a shallow water heavy gunboat, manipulating them to attack the enemy. Dormant alchemical beasts beneath a shallow water heavy gunboat? Vaughn was completely baffled. The military was solely responsible for the supply of shallow water heavy gunboats, and most of the gunboats' lower holds were completely sealed, storing vast quantities of liquid mana required for navigation, drawn from them by a few pipes. He had never heard of alchemical beasts being stored in these lower holds. Commander, news has come back from the front that the Winged Ones have raided the artillery positions behind the defenses, resulting in nearly 100 casualties. Requesting the dispatch of the remaining airships to transport the wounded back to the gunboats, the advance battalion stationed at the blocking line consisted of a mere 500 men, and the 1st Battalion, which had been dispatched after daybreak, had not yet reached the front lines. Aside from the 2 artillery battalions responsible for operating the continuous bombardment, only the 3rd Battalion remained on the 2 shallow water heavy gunboats, building a final line of defense along the riverbank. They did reserve 7 or 8 airships, but they were only used to drop ammunition and supplies to the front lines in case of emergency. Vaughn clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and decisively ordered, "Follow me to the deck and issue a notice to the entire army. I am activating the alchemy beast troops entrusted by His Majesty." Where were the alchemy beast troops? Without the energy-gathering array to transmit energy, the liquid mana they had reserved was barely enough to propel the gunboats. How could there be enough left to activate the alchemy beasts? The signalman looked bewildered, but he still strictly followed the commander's orders, quickly issuing instructions to all officers and men on the 2 gunboats. When Vaughn quickly reached the deck, all the soldiers on standby, save for the artillerymen who were still diligently manipulating the ship's guns to fire at the designated location, cast their gazes upon him, their eyes piercing. He pulled from his bosom the soul crystal engraved with countless tiny runes, resembling a small magic stone, and the next second, without hesitation, he injected his bloodline power into it to activate it. Boom. 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 Vaughn struggled to describe the strange feeling he felt at that moment. He could clearly hear his heartbeat, but it wasn't just his own. Deep below the deck, in the ship's core energy storage room, it seemed as if countless hearts were beating in unison with his own. The ship suddenly began to vibrate slightly, in an unusually coordinated rhythm, as if the magical power core in the engine room was overloaded. Then, a chaotic, patchy sound reached Vaughn's ears, as if tens of thousands of multi-legged insects were rapidly flapping their limbs, awakening from their slumber, and converging towards him. "What the hell is that?" An adjutant suddenly lifted his foot and screamed at the ground. Vaughn looked down and saw a finger-sized spider crawling out from the gap where the deck met the side. A closer look revealed a strange metallic sheen, reflecting a silvery white hue in the sunlight. It was a mechanical insect, forged and assembled from metal. Could this be the alchemical beast His Majesty had mentioned? Such a tiny alchemical beast? Before Vaughn could recover, the scraping of insects intensified. Many soldiers, waiting on the second deck, suddenly rushed onto the deck, shouting in fear, "There are strange insects on the ship." Wait? He seemed to understand. Vaughn clenched the soul crystal in his hand and closed his eyes again. Instantly, tens of thousands of tiny spiders swarmed from the cracks in the deck like a spreading tide, each paddling its limbs in a heap, swarming towards the target they'd commanded. The orc officer opened his eyes again, his pupils a strange silvery white. "I will personally lead these alchemical beasts to support the advance blocking front." Harvey looked up from the lab table, rubbing his sore eyes with difficulty. An energy-absorbing beetle emerged from a crack in the ground, cautiously poking its head out for a moment, then paddling its legs onto the tabletop. "Alright, I get it," Harvey suddenly spoke, seemingly mumbling to himself. The two guards guarding the underground laboratory door looked at each other in confusion, but dared not reply. Harvey wiped the sweat from his forehead with a hot towel hanging from the alchemy beast's arm. He breathed a sigh of relief and turned to order, "Follow me back to the office. Notify the military, City Hall, and the two chief ministers." He paused, then smiled bitterly. "Tell them, the fighting at Great Bear Lake may be getting intense. We need to hold a meeting immediately to consider sending emergency reinforcements." Chapter 590 Frenzy. Reinforcements from the 1st Battalion have arrived. They're re-establishing their artillery positions. The Special Forces team is working with the spellcasters to gradually eliminate the winged ones entrenched in the rear. "Everyone, hold the second line of defense." Benny struggled to his feet from the trench, spat blood on the ground. He instinctively touched his chest and back, then collapsed and breathed a sigh of relief. No open wounds, no missing limbs. Several clusters of lightning had just struck from the sky, striking right near his squad, blanketing the area dozens of meters in a crimson glow, including a section of the trench where the soldiers were holding. Several soldiers caught in the lightning strikes bore large, charred wounds from the electrical current. The crushing impact had pierced several bodies, and the blood and mud mingled, making it impossible to tell if the injuries were fatal. The new recruit, who had been at his side, gasped and groaned softly, rummaging in the loose dirt. A fragment of a flying ammunition box had sliced off half his hand. The resilient young man immediately bandaged the wound, but he still tried in vain to reattach the severed limb, hoping the alchemy beast could sew it back together. Benny's nose stung, and with tears welling in his eyes, he held him down and shouted, "Where's the medic? Come. There's a wounded man." The battlefield was thick with smoke, and the winding trenches stretched deep and long. He had no idea if any medics had noticed what was happening. Fortunately, amid the chaos, 3 figures carrying a stretcher trotted down the trench. "Lieutenant, we're medics." On the stretcher lay a seriously injured man, with a visible spear wound to his abdomen. Even the exposed intestines were stained with mud, clearly having been slipped back in by the medics. He quickly took out the adhesive ointment made from rubber fruit and applied a thick layer of it on the recruit's bleeding wound. The sharp-eyed medical soldier found half of the severed hand with the bones exposed in the soil, carefully wrapped it in gauze and stuffed it into his arms. "Can you still move on your own? Come back with me to the medical station in the rear. Maybe we can sew your hand back." Then the 3 of them looked at another wounded man who fell to the side, shook their heads and sighed. "The neck is pierced and the bleeding is too much. Sorry, sir, he can't be saved." Benny wiped the sweat from his face vigorously, raised his hand and pushed the other party hard, urging, "Take the wounded away quickly, don't leave him here." At this moment, a group of soldiers suddenly rushed over from the trench in the opposite direction. They were all unfamiliar faces. They caught Benny and shouted, "The 5th team of the 1st Battalion has been ordered to come to reinforce. We will take over the position you are responsible for next. Please arrange to send all the wounded to the rear for treatment." As if in response to the credibility of the other party's words, almost at the same time, the familiar and reassuring whistling of artillery shells came from the sky again, and the second round of bombing of the shallow water heavy gunboat finally arrived. Phil Holden, his entire body ablaze with fiery flames, stepped on the shoulder of a winged one and, with a sly grin, tore its fleshy wings off. Just before the other creature attempted a desperate self-destruction, he thrust his fists hard, sending it flying and crashing into a thick tree trunk in a disfigured state. Not far away, Stormwalker was locked in a battle on the ground with 3 enemies. The red light and black water gradually lost their accuracy in the freezing tornado whips up by the frost. 2 bloodline warriors, armed with bolters, were nearby, making it easy to eliminate their targets. After nearly 2 hours of continuous spellcasting, the Son of Fire felt faintly exhausted. To maximize the damage done to the winged ones, he had to cast several high-level instantaneous spells, exhausting all his stored mana without reservation. He instinctively reached for his waist, only to find nothing. Then he suddenly remembered that the high-speed flight and violent collision when he used Scorching Strike had already shattered all the magic recovery potions he was carrying. Now, there was probably not a drop left. He shook his head helplessly and was about to take off again, rushing towards the winged living who were hiding high in the treetops and firing at them, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw a young, fresh-faced recruit suddenly run out of his hiding trench, scrambled to the cannon, and used all his strength to try to right the tilted barrel. "You're killing yourself," the new recruit, looking even younger than his incompetent nephew, Dirt, stopped him in his tracks and shouted in a deep voice, "Return to the bunker. No one is allowed back to the artillery position until the winged ones are completely eliminated." The new recruit showed no fear in the face of a high-level spellcaster. Glancing at his ornate robes and the bare chest devoid of any insignia of rank, he saluted, "Master Mage, you have no authority to command artillery units. We need to resume the bombardment immediately and provide fire support to the soldiers on the front lines." With that, several more soldiers emerged from the trenches, carefully returning to their posts and beginning to move the ammunition. The Son of Fire shouted angrily, "Where's your direct superior? Did he send you out here to die?" The soldiers kept busy, but the first new recruit who emerged wiped his nose and whispered, "Our superior has died in the line of duty. Now I command the 2nd Artillery Squad." The Fire Mage was speechless. Just as he was about to shake his head and leave, a sudden sound of breaking wind echoed overhead. Gathering strength and clenching his flaming fist slammed down, severing a blackwater spear in half with a bang, sending shattered black crystal fragments scattering everywhere. He looked up and immediately spotted several winged beings hovering in the dense canopy. "Sir, be careful," the new recruits suddenly shouted at him. They had seen the enemies hiding in the treetops, and had seen them gathering together, preparing to unleash cluster lightning. The Son of Fire had every chance of avoiding them, but if he did so, the young soldiers behind him would surely be doomed. He gritted his teeth, cursed silently, and a wall of blazing, dazzling flames suddenly rose from the ground, blocking the incoming attack. With a resounding boom, intense flames and smoke filled an area dozens of meters in radius. The Son of Fire knelt on one knee, holding back for a moment, but finally, with a gurgling sound, he vomited blood and collapsed to the ground. A pair of frail arms emerged from the smoke, groping for a hold of his collar and struggling to drag him backwards. From the front came the sound of several wings flapping as the winged ones descended to the ground. "Leave me alone, run," the Son of Fire breathed in 2 hard breaths, drawing his magic revolver and aiming it forward, urgently urging them. But the arms behind him didn't let go. Suddenly, he heard Stormwalker's cry of shock and anger. A rustling sound came from behind, like thousands of ants paddling their legs, creating a terrifying commotion. Suddenly, countless spider-like mechanical insects surged out of the smoke and dust, leaping directly over the Son of Fire's prone form, some even taking the path and scrambling over his shoulders. The Fire Mage, startled, struggled to grab a mechanical spider that was taking advantage of him. He exerted a little force, but found it impossible to crush. He couldn't tell if it was due to the weakness of his wounds, or if it was simply made of magical metal. Straight ahead, the approaching figures of several winged ones appeared, only to be instantly overwhelmed by the surging insect tide. Seconds later, the swarm that had overwhelmed the enemies quickly dispersed, continuing its march toward the ongoing exchange of fire in the distance. The Son of Fire was horrified to discover that all that remained were a few tattered pieces of husks. Chapter 591, A Hard-Affected Victory. A tidal wave of mechanical insects, composed of countless miniature alchemical beasts, overran one defensive line after another, surging toward the enemy like a tidal wave. Commander Vaughn's sudden appearance revealed to the soldiers that these bizarre metal insects were reinforcements from the rear. But the demonic lizardmen, unaware of this secret weapon, were in dire straits. The thumb-sized, incredibly sturdy mechanical spiders seemed designed to counter them. Their tiny, sharp, area of effect black crystal spikes proved ineffective in shattering them, while full-throttle thrusts with whips or crystal spears often only pierced the ground, only to have the spiders burrow through and reemerge. Their numbers were so dense that even Vaughn, who swiftly controlled them in his magic scooter to reach the battlefield, couldn't fully count how many of these terrifying alchemical creations were hidden within the 2 gunboats. Perhaps 100,000, or even 1,000,000, they gathered in a silvery white wave gleaming with a metallic sheen, drowning the demon lizardmen who had almost reached the second trench. After the tide washed over, only a few battered husks remained on the ground. Many soldiers with keen eyes saw the tiny spiders slithering up the enemy's uneven armor, piercing the red-breathing sacs beside their ears and burrowing directly into their soft bodies. A few spiders that lagged behind, crawling across the trench, accidentally fell to the soldiers' feet. Like living insects, they struggled with their bellies facing the sky, their legs flapping vigorously. The sharp-eyed soldiers immediately spotted them, carefully scooped them up, and placed them back on the ground. These spiders can distinguish friend from foe. They won't attack our soldiers at all. The enemy is completely entangled by them. This is the powerful soul magic your majesty has cast. Follow them, and push back. Numerous officers immediately received orders from the rear, rising to their feet and shouting at the top of their lungs. The artillery positions also resumed their bombardment, hurling shells across the trenches, relentlessly pelting the retreating enemy. The relentless bombardment nearly cut off any escape routes. The artillery barrage and the swarm of mechanical insects completely blocked their paths, forcing them to gather closer and tighten their formation in the final struggle. The freed spellcasters and bloodline warriors wielded sniper-type magic rifles and beam weapons, aiming at the winged ones fighting independently in the sky, shooting them down from the dense treetops where they hid. The prolonged battle not only depleted the spellcasters' mana, but also the winged evolvers faced energy depletion. The frequency of the black water and red light attacks from the sky gradually decreased with time, until they could no longer unleash any offensive means and, flapping their flesh wings, began to retreat towards the floating island. At that moment, a resounding explosion, like the collapse of heaven and earth, suddenly rang out from the direction of Great Bear Lake. Under the relentless, raining bombardment of magical naval artillery, the portion of floating island number 3 that rose hundreds of feet above the surface was flattened by nearly half. Massive fragments peeled off its surface, splattering into the lake. Then, the floating island suddenly began to tremble and shake violently, like a giant sea beast from ancient times, silently roaring and struggling in pain from the damage. The petal-shaped opening on the top, used to release the winged beings, had long since been twisted and shattered by the bombardment. Lightning-shaped cracks appeared on the surface of the floating island, and a torrent of viscous black water gushed out, dyeing the entire lake a rich black. Another shell, whistling at high speed, slammed heavily into the floating island. With this fierce bombardment, a huge section of the floating island's surface suddenly peeled back, revealing the spiral tunnel structure within. And it seemed to be the final straw that broke the camel's back. Look! Floating island number 3 is sinking. It's been sunk. The soldier in charge of observation suddenly raised his telescope and shouted in surprise. The news spread across the entire front. The battlefield suddenly erupted in excitement. Soldiers cheered as they rushed out of the trenches and launched a victorious charge against the enemy, whose blackwater supplies had been exhausted. As the enemies on the ground and in the air were eliminated one by one, the fierce battle finally came to an end. The son of fire brushed aside the potion tube the medic was holding to his lips, shaking his head. Ordinary potions won't work on me, young man. Bring me a bottle of vodka. Suddenly, Stormrunner flung open the tent flap and entered, jokingly scolding, "If recovery potions don't work, then what about liquor?" The fire mage rolled his eyes, struggled to his feet, and walked out of the tent, ignoring the soldiers' attempts to stop him. He circled the rear supply camp before finding Commander Vaughn, looking pale, in a newly erected tent. "Good fellow. What are those strange things you brought, those micro-alchemical beasts? The secret weapons His Majesty Harvey entrusted to you? Why didn't you use them sooner? You're making the battle so difficult." With that, he slapped the orc's sturdy shoulder, knocking him back onto his cot. The two men then noticed that Vaughn's face was abnormally pale, his body drenched in sweat, and he looked completely exhausted. "Are you injured? Why are you so weak?" Vaughn waved his hand, his voice hoarse as he slowly explained, "This is why. His Majesty orders us not to use those alchemical beasts unless absolutely necessary. Just using them as a spiritual connection for him has practically drained my bloodline strength and will." The Son of Flame was stunned. After a few seconds, he spoke dryly. You said that those countless alchemical beasts that just poured into the battlefield were controlled by His Majesty Harvey through your mental power. How could this be possible? Great Bear Lake and Spark City were nearly 1,000 miles apart. Even the two legendary chiefs stationed in the north couldn't connect the two places with any magic, let alone control hundreds of thousands of alchemical creatures to participate in the battle. Vaughn closed his eyes, giving a look of acquiescence, but he didn't intend to explain further. Fell was about to ask further questions when Stormrunner quietly tugged at his sleeve and shook his head gravely. The Son of Flame instantly understood and wisely chose to remain silent. "Commander, this is bad. Our little spiders, those alchemy beasts, have suddenly all collapsed, scattered across the battlefield like beans. What should we do?" An adjutant hurried into the tent, reporting to his superior with a strange expression. Vaughn pushed himself up in a grouchy manner and weakly ordered, "What else can we do? Pick them up." Chapter 592 Post-War Summary. Harvey gathered everyone in the castle. Before he could devise a plan for emergency reinforcements to Great Bear Lake, he received news of a victory on the front lines. Even he hadn't anticipated that the backup plan hidden within the shallow water heavy gunboat would prove so effective at the crucial moment of battle. Those tiny spiders, transformed entirely from energy-absorbing beetles, were originally a pilot private experiment, made from scraps left over from the mass production of alchemical beasts in alchemical laboratories and military factories. However, even after undergoing mass soul transfer, the finger-sized alchemical beasts retained their original properties, allowing them to perform delicate tasks under Harvey's control. Because of this, Harvey hadn't held high hopes for their effectiveness on the battlefield. This was a completely unexpected surprise. With just over 2,000 troops, supported by 2 shallow water heavy gunboats and nearly 100 aerial mages, we were able to sink a floating island fortress of the Lizardmen. Reiner's tone was filled with inexpressible joy. Once this news reaches the country, it will undoubtedly excite the people and boost their confidence. Harvey shook his head and said slowly, the battle also exposed our continued lack of firepower. 2 shallow water heavy gunboats, 8 large caliber magical naval guns, dozens of portable artillery pieces, and a large number of anti-aircraft beam weapons. They were still somewhat stretched against an enemy that knew no fear or death and charged forward in unison. The Northern Army was currently meticulously cleaning up the battlefield. The depths of Great Bear Lake were unfathomable, and the wreckage of the completely submerged floating islands must have held a few enemy remnants, but the exact number was impossible to verify. According to current statistics, only the 3,000 or so lizardmen who landed were killed by the soldiers' artillery and gunfire, including nearly 1,000 winged ones. Many more enemies were killed by the long-range bombardment of the naval guns, shattered to death in the inner passageways by the relentless barrage before they could even emerge from the floating islands. Consequently, the thousands of corpses floating on the lake's surface were mostly intact, unlike their counterparts who had landed, missing limbs or reduced to hollow shells by alchemical spiders. Unfortunately, these alien bodies and artifacts are so bizarre that we haven't yet been able to research their applications. Chief Dawson sighed with regret. Aside from destroying their active forces, we've gained nothing. After officially moving into the new Federation building, he and Seraph immediately set to work, establishing a research team comprised of Federation members and local spellcasters. They worked tirelessly to decipher the various artifacts of the demonic lizardmen, but to date, no significant progress has been made. Whether it was fragments of the floating islands, such as deep-sea coral and reef structures, the demonic-resistant skins of the demonic lizardmen, or even the flesh and blood extracted from their soft bodies, apart from further confirmation of the Blackwater's demonic nature, nothing else had been gained. These seemingly ordinary, featureless materials, in the hands of these strange aliens, could wield such formidable combat power. Unless we can capture, or even occupy an entire floating island fortress, we'll likely struggle to decipher the secrets of this alien race, Seraph said after a long silence. Sir, that's a bit much, Harvey said with a wry smile, shrugging and spreading his hands. If we truly had the ability, we would have driven them out completely long ago. The next topic became somewhat awkward. The meeting, originally intended to discuss emergency reinforcements, suddenly turned into post-battle debriefing, and the Union's Mage chapter had to be mentioned, along with the awkward role it played in this battle. While they were clearly competent as aerial decoys, facing an enemy many times their size, these battle mages, accustomed to small-scale combat, had limited ability to stop and destroy the winged ones. 100 battle mages, aided by the airships, had shot down fewer than 500 enemies. Most of these formidable winged ones were eliminated after approaching the defensive lines and voluntarily descending to the ground, where they encountered fierce resistance from soldiers and bloodline warriors. The aliens' magic-resistant shells proved incredibly effective against spellcasters. At the height of the battle, the mages even drew their issued magic revolvers and engaged the enemy at close range, leaving them no time to unleash their prized high-level offensive magic. Seeing the two chiefs remain silent, Shield awkwardly stepped forward to redress the enemy. He coughed softly and spoke slowly. We certainly underestimated the number of winged ones. The mages, manipulating the airships, fought 10 to 1, and we were lucky to avoid significant casualties. Fortunately, this battle had clearly taught them that relying solely on spellcasters to defeat the enemy was unrealistic. Both their offensive methods and their numbers were woefully insufficient. In the near future, The central role on the battlefield will likely truly be vested in the hands of those disciplined and numerous mortal soldiers. After quickly brushing over the embarrassing topic for their allies, everyone turned to the casualties. Harvey had actually been briefed on the specific figures the moment he received the reports from the front lines. Undoubtedly, the Emperor's primary concern was the casualties. 3 fully staffed battalions totaling 1,500 men, a special forces squad of 100 bloodline warriors, and a similar number of nearly 100 Federation battle mages. 90 killed, over 280 wounded. Putting aside the logistics personnel, who rarely saw the front lines, even the artillery, hidden behind the front lines of the fighting, suffered significant losses. The vast majority of casualties were caused by the winged ones who approached the defensive lines. The black crystal spears hurled overhead made the soldiers impervious to attack, and the winged ones' cluster attacks were even more formidable. The wounded brought to the rear medical stations suffered penetrating wounds and burns. Even with the rapid hemostasis of rubber fruit coagulant and the rapid sutures of several medical alchemists, many still succumbed. Harvey didn't intend to hold the aerial mages responsible for letting the enemy close to the lines, and naturally, he couldn't hold the medics responsible either. These young men, who had only received a few months of rudimentary training at the medical academy, were also brave warriors risking their lives, carrying stretchers and engaging in the front lines of the firefight. As the scale of the fighting continued to expand, more casualties were inevitable. There was no other solution but to maximize the Army's medical capabilities and train more medics with battlefield first aid skills. Notify the front lines to gather the corpses of the lizardmen and burn them. As for the fallen soldiers, count their numbers and names and bring them back for a proper burial. Harvey's tone was heavy as he looked around at the crowd and spoke slowly. This is our first true victory against an alien race. I plan to hold a celebration in commemoration to reward the soldiers who fought bravely and to honor the fallen heroes. Chapter 593, Smooth Return. Compared to the anxiety he'd felt before the war, Harvey's anxiety finally eased after securing a hard-fought first victory. At the dawn of spring, he made a public address to the entire kingdom, officially announcing the change of name for the state under his rule, the United Kingdom of St. Valen in the north, and clarifying the importance of Spark City as the kingdom's capital. Through administrative notices and newspapers, the news quickly reached the populace. Officials also learned of the Northern Army's inspiring victory, and for a time, nearly everyone in the kingdom was avidly discussing the alien invasion. City Hall also took the opportunity to officially rename itself the Ministry of State, becoming the supreme authority for military and political administration in the United Kingdom, alongside the similarly restructured Ministry of Defense. With the gradual training and recruitment of military and political officials at all levels, Harvey's workload was significantly reduced. Now, the amount of government affairs requiring his personal attention was limited. Most of the time, he simply attended important meetings and served as a ruthless signing machine. With more free time, he was finally able to focus on addressing his fear of insufficient firepower. Several newly launched military research and development projects immediately entered the preparatory stages. With the start of spring plowing, the entire north seemed to awaken from hibernation. From farms to mining areas, industrial parks, and garrisons, new facilities and buildings could be seen everywhere, and people bustled about day and night. The 2 tracks at the kingdom's central station were bustling with activity day and night. The city's vibrant energy was enough to astonish any newcomer. The latest issue of Spark Weekly had just been published, and the next day, the victorious Northern Army arrived. Having learned the news early from the newspapers, the public spontaneously gathered outside the city to greet their heroes, their cheers and applause echoing almost to the mountain tops. After completing his official duties, Von, along with a group of officers, the Son of Flame, and other battle mages, headed to the castle to meet the long-awaited Emperor. Your Majesty, we have successfully carried out this raid against the aliens of Great Bear Lake. The orc officer knelt on one knee, leaning on his sword and bowing his head in salute to Harvey. Harvey waved with a smile, and after they had taken their seats, he slowly said, "This was a hard-fought victory. The Northern Army has never paid such a heavy price since its founding. Despite this, your performance did not disappoint me. The soldiers fought bravely, unafraid of the enemy's brutality, which made me very happy." This praise clearly revealed the Emperor's recognition and preference for the Army's performance, which immediately made the Son of Fire and Stormwalker, who were left aside, feel a little embarrassed. The Fire Mage coughed subconsciously, but didn't know what to say. He stared into space with a somewhat dejected expression. Fair, Mr. Willie, our battle mages have also performed well, and the fact is just as I said, the close cooperation between spellcasters and mortal soldiers in battle will surely enable us to better control the battlefield situation and completely defeat the invading enemy. Listening to the sincerity that could not be ignored in Harvey's words, and the indiscriminate use of we to refer to this group of battle mages who came from afar, Stormwalker felt his heart warm, and the resentment and shame that had been suppressed for a long time disappeared. He stood up immediately, but changed his usual ancient wizard etiquette. He clenched his fist on his chest, gave Harvey a northern military salute, and said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, we have learned a lot from this battle. I finally understand the true meaning of the words you often say, unity is strength." Harvey felt ashamed, nodded slightly, turned to the still dazed son of fire and smiled. Fair, the talent and strength of my commander did not disappoint you, did they? Fair immediately remembered the arrogant remarks before the expedition. His old face flushed and he said hesitantly, "Colonel Vaughn, his control of the battlefield situation really lived up to my expectations. At the most critical moment, it was he who decisively used the secret weapon handed over by your Majesty, which instantly broke the stalemate and enabled us to win. It was rare for this old argumentative person to admit his weakness in front of him, and he did not act rashly or impulsively during the entire operation, nor did he do anything dangerous or reckless." Harvey also secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But the next moment, the other side immediately defied the odds, as if the humiliating admission of defeat hadn't even occurred. "But your Majesty, you gave Colonel Vaughn a secret weapon, but why do your bloodline warriors also have new equipment we've never seen before? That bolter. Yes. Why aren't they issued to the battle mages? Are you treating them differently?" Harvey shook his head helplessly, smiling wryly. He raised his hand and beckoned the deputy captain of the Royal Guard standing nearby. "Ironhead, give your sidearm to Mr. Fell to try." Ironhead grinned and whispered, "Your Majesty, bolters are too heavy." "It's not, unless we're escorting you out. We never carry them in the castle." Vaughn silently signaled to his lieutenant, who immediately dispatched a man to retrieve an empty rifle from the Royal Guard's armory. After a few quick assembly steps, he handed it to Fell. The son of fire curled his lips, raised his hand, and grasped the gun's handle. Without changing his expression, he lifted it up and examined it carefully. Less than half the length of a magic rifle, but slightly longer than a revolver, its barrel boasted a larger caliber, more than double that of a conventional magical weapon. This meant its ammunition was equally formidable. A miniature portable cannon? He expertly inspected the magazine on the handle, following the same method the soldiers had used to assemble their guns, and discovered it held only room for one round. This thing can only fire a single shot. The magic blast is so powerful that ordinary gun casting techniques simply can't guarantee it won't explode, so they use a large amount of magical minerals, which is why, despite its appearance as a short gun, it actually weighs over 50 pounds, with the exception of those like the Sons of Fire who have devoted themselves to the magical transformation of their flesh. Traditional battle mages simply couldn't afford such a weight. Carrying it would only deprive them of their agility and maneuverability, effectively negating their potential to further their advantage. The fire mage, however, was unfazed. He grinned and said, "Such a powerful heavy weapon is naturally only wielded by those capable. Your Majesty, please issue it to me. I'll go and claim my allotted ammunition later." With that, he casually accepted the new gun in front of everyone. "You're welcome to have it if you like. All new weapons developed in Spark City will be test-fired by fellow mages in the new union. If it's suitable for distribution, I'll definitely not hide it." Harvey spread his hands and smiled at the astonished faces of the high-ranking battle mages in the hall. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 594 Medical Inspection. Upon hearing that the Emperor was planning a surprise inspection, Egno led his administrative officers and arrived early at the gates of the hospital. The hospital, now officially renamed the Kingdom Medical Department, was under the purview of the Department of State, responsible for epidemic prevention and medical services for the entire population of the United Kingdom. Of course, the medical department also trained and supplied military doctors for the Ministry of Defense and the military. As minister, Egno was well aware of the purpose of Harvey's surprise inspection. Although the Battle of Great Bear Lake was a victory, The performance of the Army's battlefield medical department was somewhat lackluster. While the over 100 soldiers killed in action were certainly not to blame, the emergency treatment of 300 seriously injured and minor casualties clearly exposed the inadequacy of the medical staff. The hospital's specialized training in battlefield first aid often focused solely on rapid hemostasis and wound suturing, rendering it inadequate for more complex injuries and the subsequent risks of infection. This also resulted in dozens of seriously injured soldiers, rescued from death, losing their precious lives during the victorious return journey due to lack of timely and effective treatment. Not all medical personnel, like Egno, possessed both the elven talent for nature magic and considerable expertise in medical research. Most of the half-elves who accompanied him were merely apprentices. Even if all were sent to the battlefield, their meager healing skills wouldn't be enough to mend even a severed finger. Even more so were ordinary physicians. They relied on the exquisite suturing abilities of their alchemic beasts, along with the hemostatic dressings and healing potions developed by the infirmary. Wounded soldiers brought back from the battlefield were often stitched up, bandaged, and treated with medicine, then left to recover naturally. The entire process was largely similar to that in the infirmary, following the exacting battlefield first aid procedures taught in their training. However, few understood the complexities of the battlefield environment, and the infection rate in outdoor medical care far exceeded that of the clean, comfortable infirmary. Naturally, the people of this era didn't understand the concept of infection, let alone the mechanisms of bacterial and viral reproduction. Gauze bandages and silk sutures needed to be boiled before use. Hemostasis treatments also required debridement with boiled water. Soldiers exhausted from intense combat were given a specific mixture of sugar and salt water, rather than simply force-feeding potions. These requirements were understood without understanding their rationale. This rigid adherence to regulations led to numerous errors. Many soldiers died from festering wounds and persistent fevers. Given their already weakened constitutions, taking more magical potions would have made them unable to withstand the erosion of magic power, leading to rapid organ failure. Although aware of the Emperor's potential punishment, Egno reported his findings out of a sense of duty. Harvey remained silent, flipping through the reports, carefully reviewing each soldier's medical records. Closing the report, he tapped the armrest of his chair, causing the medical officers present to sit up straight with a startled jolt. Now you understand that alchemical beasts and alchemical potions aren't the only way to treat illness and save lives. Harvey's powerful mind and soul gave him a memory far superior to that of ordinary spellcasters. He could easily recite a soldier's detailed medical history. Hugh Henderson, 22, from Frostfloor Town in Grizzly Territory, was pierced in the waist and abdomen by a blackwater spear during battle. After hemostasis and sutures, he died on the return journey from infection and internal bleeding caused by a ruptured intestine. Ewan, 28, from the wasteland, was struck by concentrated red light during battle, suffering extensive burns to his face, shoulders, neck, and chest. After receiving dressings and continuous oral recovery potions, he died on the return journey from high fever and organ failure caused by the wound ulceration, two classic examples of medical malpractice, one of undertreatment, the other of overtreatment. A middle-aged medical officer seated next to Egno stood up suddenly. His pointed ears and delicate features betrayed his half-elf identity. His face flushed with shame, and he lowered his head, rubbing his chest as he spoke in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, for the Great Bear Lake operation, I am responsible for the military's medical mission. I bear full responsibility." Harvey interrupted him with a wave of his hand, saying gently, "I have no intention of holding you accountable, and today's meeting is not a trial. I simply ask that you reflect." He clapped his hands, and his personal guard stepped forward with a thick sheaf of documents, distributing them to the gathered medical officers. "Take a look, everyone. This is a set of field medical regulations I've been drafting. It details the emergency medical classification system, the use of magical potions, and detailed disinfection and infection management procedures." As he finished speaking, the entire room erupted in the rustling of papers. Seeing the document's opening paragraph prominently stating the primary core principle of battlefield medicine is to ensure the safety of battlefield medical personnel, Egno quietly raised his head and glanced at Harvey, seated at the head with a complex expression. The document then offered no innovative treatment plans, nor did it propose the use of more advanced medical alchemists. Instead, it presented a multi-dozen point injury assessment and classification system, prioritizing controlling heavy bleeding and ensuring the casualty's breathing. Wait a minute. What was intubation? Managing open pneumothorax, well, it was a procedure for penetrating wounds affecting the lungs and neck. Managing shock and coma, examining head trauma, and preventing hypothermia from exsanguination. In short, this hilariously detailed opening preface was primarily designed to confirm whether the casualty still required emergency care, thereby avoiding wasting precious medical personnel and delaying the care of other casualties. Scrolling further, the subsequent content left him speechless. Treatment for embedded foreign bodies, burns, penetrating wounds, fractures, and, most importantly, infection prevention. Besides using gauze and sutures soaked in boiling water, clean water and repeatedly distilled spirits were equally important for cleaning wounds. Instead, they abandoned their usual healing potions. Purple olive and hawksbeak garlic? Your Majesty. These two plants are clearly wildflowers and common spices devoid of any magical properties. Seeing a proposed drug formula research proposal mentioned in the infection prevention section, Egno finally put down the document and looked up at Harvey in astonishment. Harvey nodded and smiled. Your research into magical plants is undeniable, but you've completely neglected the development and exploration of common herbal remedies. This is the Shepherd Knight, ahem. This is a formula submitted to me by Minister of Agriculture Ambich Kenny. It's used by many livestock farmers in the Southern Territories to prevent and treat postpartum fever in livestock. They were both invasive infections caused by E. coli, Streptococcus, and Staphylococcus. Harvey reasoned that since it was so effective on livestock, it could naturally be applied to humans as well. Compared to alchemical potions that are powerful but only speed up the healing process, this common plant extract, safe for mortals, is significantly more effective and effectively avoids the side effects of mortals being intolerant to magical erosion. Egno nodded and stood up with a serious expression. I understand, Your Majesty. Please give me 3 days. We will immediately begin research and development of the potion and complete clinical trials simultaneously. Chapter 595 Belonging. The brick and wood house was warm and cozy. Even though spring had already arrived, the city's central heating was still running. This made Schick, accustomed to going barefoot at home, feel extremely comfortable. For the past 20 years, he had been barefoot in the mining area, which had caused his toes to repeatedly suffer from frostbite. Wearing the brand new army-issued boots for a long time only made them itchy and uncomfortable. Perhaps taking some time to visit the military clinic and ask the military doctors for some ointment to heal the scars would completely cure this ailment that had plagued him for half his life. As he thought about this, he picked up the leather boots that were neatly placed at the door and carefully cleaned them with a small brush issued. If the living environment in Spark City was a heaven on earth that far exceeded his expectations, then these days since joining the army had given him a true understanding of the responsibilities and morals that are essential for being human. Serving the Emperor loyally, fighting bravely against the enemy, wasn't about satisfying the power-hungry aristocrats and supreme rulers, but about defending the common people of their own descent, preserving their hard-earned comfort and homeland. These principles were initially drilled into the new recruits' heads by their political instructors in the mandatory nightly ideological classes their superiors forced them to attend. But as time went on, Schick clearly learned and understood more from the veterans and comrades around him. Such a homeland, such kin, such a life, was truly worth everyone's all, fighting and defending at the risk of their lives. Suddenly, there were knocks on the door. He opened it to reveal several young children, no taller than his waist, standing outside, jostling each other. Brother Schick. I knew you were home on leave today. The children, watching the young man with a smile on their faces, playfully streamed into the small room, less than 20 square meters. Where's your magic rifle? Didn't you say you'd show us the legendary lance that could slay alien monsters? The open room, besides the clearly visible bathroom, contained only a simple wardrobe, a desk, and a single bed pressed against the wall. The windows were tightly shut, and the occasional chill of early spring couldn't penetrate the tightly sealed sashes, diffusing the warmth into the room. The copper heating pipes embedded in the wall curved directly onto the bed, transferring some of the heat directly to the bed, making the blanket the warmest area in the room. The magic rifle is a soldier's most important combat weapon. You can't take it out of the barracks without permission, and I certainly can't give it to you as a toy. The children obediently filed into the bathroom, turned on the brass faucet, rinsed their feet one by one, and then obediently climbed onto the single bed, sitting cross-legged side by side. HMPH, since there aren't any big guns to show us, you should at least tell us about the recent battle against the monsters on the city walls. Sick couldn't help but smile fondly. He pulled an oil paper package from a hanging wall cabinet and distributed the pre-cut cheese between the children. This was the supplementary food ration to the common soldiers by the defense forces, a quick way to replenish their calories during cross-country marches. Sick had saved a lot of it and secretly brought it back to treat the children from Bluethorn City. Almost all of these slaves brought back to the capital by the Northern Army were completely illiterate. Even after being sent to nighttime literacy schools, only a few graduated and could read and write. This forced most to migrate to the Eastern Basin, where they took simple manual labor in the pioneer base. Those who remained in the capital could only find jobs on farms and in forestry, where the recruitment standards were relatively low. Fortunately, His Majesty fulfilled his promise. Everyone had a job that was enough to feed their families, and they had completely escaped the shame of slavery. They never faced any overt discrimination in the capital. This was a gift not from the gods, but a blessing they could never have anticipated in their lives. I've already told you about the monster war. Now let me test your academic performance in elementary school, Schick suggested with a wink and a hint of mischief. The children immediately cried out in pain. No. Learning is too painful. The only reason we've managed to persevere is because teacher Sophia is so gentle and beautiful. Excellent. For those who persevere in completing their homework, she even gives us candy in private. It's as good as the cheese you brought back. Schick had heard that the teachers often rewarded and provided these former slave children with snacks and pastries. Most of these children's parents worked relatively low-paying jobs, and many even relied on temporary construction work to support their families. They had enough to eat, but naturally, they couldn't provide their children with any extra comforts. Looking at the children's gradually round and white faces, Schick touched the pouch on his chest and said with a smile, "Since cheese can't bribe you, why don't I take you out today and let's go to the convenience restaurant in the market area to enjoy a big meal?" The children widened their eyes and asked in disbelief, "Convenience restaurant? Is it the restaurant that local classmates often mentioned to us? There are golden and crispy cutlets, unlimited cream of mushroom soup, and white bread with honey jam." The youngest child timidly counted on his fingers and said, "That's probably not cheap, right? My father told me, if I can successfully graduate from junior high school, he will save enough money for our whole family to enjoy it as a celebration." Schick shook his head, took out a stack of banknotes from his pouch, waved it in his hand. "No need to wait until then. My current salary is enough for you to enjoy it in advance." The children jumped up from the bed and cheered. There was no time to change into the casual clothes that had not been completely dried. Schick could only wear the standard uniform issued by the defense force and took the children to the market area with laughter. Whether officially run or privately owned, restaurants in the market area are often packed in the evenings, partly due to the capital's thriving citizens and partly due to strict price controls on consumer goods. High-end restaurants like Honey and Bear weren't Schick's first choice. Harvest Ale, which he'd often heard his local comrades mention while in the army, was more affordable. This privately run, accessible restaurant primarily catered to the local middle class, living near the market area. While the menu was limited, it was generous and delicious. The somewhat portly middle-aged owner, who even served as a waiter, glanced at Schick, who had arrived with a group of children. He took in Schick's crisp military uniform and a remarkably kind smile. "Young soldier. Oh. And the lovely children, what would you like to order for dinner?" The fat owner winked at Hick and suggested gently, "If you choose the pork chop set meal, we'll provide an extra berry pancake. This is a privilege only for soldiers dining here. Don't worry about the children not having enough. I'll personally provide you with a double portion." Hick was stunned for a moment, nervously adjusting his uniform. He opened his mouth, unsure how to respond. This was his first time dining out. Facing the owner's eager gaze and the kind eyes of the diners around him, he felt the long-healed scars on his face warm slightly. "Then, let's have the set meal. Thank you for your generosity," the fat owner nodded, patting the young soldier's shoulder with his broad hand. "No, we should thank you. Thank you, the soldiers who fought so bravely to defend our precious home and kingdom." The guests around him raised their glasses, looked at Hick with smiles, and said in unison, "Your Majesty. To the brave soldiers who fought and defended our homeland." Chapter 596 Victory Day, end of this volume. 3 days later, Spark Weekly unexpectedly published a supplement, devoting a full 2/3 of its pages to the heroic deeds of the soldiers who died in the Battle of Great Bear Lake. Briefly, the supplement provided the public with the soldiers' origins and life stories. Their funerals were held quietly within the military, and their cremated remains were buried, as usual, in the heroes' cemetery outside the south gate, where their comrades and families could pay their respects privately. Local residents, familiar with their achievements, spontaneously gathered at the heroes' monument in front of the new Union building for a moment of silence. For a moment, the square was bustling with people, and the towering obelisk was covered in flowers. Ross, who had just finished his shift at the General Staff headquarters, bought a bouquet of pure white flowers from a vendor in the market area, changed into a brand new, crisp military civilian uniform, and walked through the inner city, slowly heading towards the hero's monument. "Lieutenant Ross," a familiar voice suddenly called out to him. Ross instinctively turned around and spotted two young officers, also clutching white flowers, walking towards him side by side, wearing the same staff officer uniform. "Lieutenant Ivan? Are you also taking advantage of the day off to pay your respects to the fallen soldiers?" Although they didn't work on the same staff, Ross had heard of this unusually active academic officer and quickly nodded in greeting. Ivan nodded, and then introduced his colleagues to him. "This is Lieutenant Dickinson. He works in the general staff like us. You probably haven't met him before." Ross looked at the other person politely, but for some reason he felt familiar. He was considering asking, but the other party took the initiative to say, "We should have met before. 5 years ago, at the royal tournament in the old capital, Jinhu City, Lord Ross challenged 3 noble knights from Montenegro port in a row, which was really brilliant." "Oh. You are Chief Knight Dickinson," Ross suddenly realized, and immediately recalled that after he won the tournament and received the sash award from the former majesty, the knight in silver armor beside the throne cast a look of approval at him. Dickinson smiled politely, waved off Ross's pleasantries, and sighed, "Let's not dwell on the past. We're just colleagues now." Seeing they were old acquaintances, Ivan smiled. "Let's go to the monument together. We might not be able to get in any later." After all, it was almost noon, and the Victory Day celebrations were also taking place at Monument Square. It wouldn't be long before the defense forces would arrive and begin clearing the area. "I heard that a play directed by Minister of Culture, His Excellency Ash, will be performed tonight at Monument Square. Do you plan to stay and watch after the celebrations?" Ross instinctively started a conversation. Ivan raised an eyebrow and pressed, "Is it the play called The Hero's Path? I believe it's based on the story of the Northern Army's expedition to Isengard." This military operation was the subject of in-depth strategic planning by our department. "We know the details by heart, probably even better than the actors themselves." Dickinson shrugged and said calmly, "Indeed, the subsequent work involving the relocation and accommodation of the borderland tribes is being directly handled by my team. While military staff officers generally hold low ranks, the matters they handle often involve confidentiality regulations. Unless they bring it up, even colleagues from different departments won't delve into the details." Just like Ivan and the others wouldn't proactively inquire about Ross's specific duties at the Ice Sea base. Therefore, Ross tactfully changed the subject and said with a smile, "I heard that those rootless people who moved in large numbers to Fingigan City are very enthusiastic about joining the army and fighting. The people in the Fingigan City recruiting office should be grinning from ear to ear about this." Dickinson was silent for a moment, and then he answered carefully, "The enthusiasm is indeed very high, but it's a pity that the literacy rate is ridiculously low. Without a long period of literacy learning, it is impossible to meet the Army's recruitment standards. Ever since His Majesty the United Kingdom issued a mobilization order to fight against foreign races, the work of recruiting soldiers has been like a bottomless pit that can never be filled. From the royal capital to the many administrative cities and rural towns in the south, there are recruiting officers almost everywhere. These guys who hold loudspeakers and post notices everywhere don't even hesitate to go to the fields and preach passionately. Even in small villages with a population of less than 100 households, you can see their large banners hanging at the entrance of literacy schools. The nation's military expanded rapidly to terrifying proportions, yet surprisingly, the emperor's aggressive military policies didn't lead to the collapse of all industries and the resulting chaos and devastation of the people. This was nothing short of miraculous. Periodically, rumbling trains would bring a batch of fresh recruits, fresh from their homeland, to the capital. After being carefully selected by the Northern Army, the remaining recruits would be sent to the Defense Army for further selection before returning by train to the south, where they would be deployed at various locations according to the military's dispatch. The Ministry of National Defense's budget seemed perpetually ample, and salaries and benefits were consistently paid to officers and soldiers of all ranks, regardless of rank. Even in the days leading up to the harvest, when food reserves were running low for the royal families and noble lords, the soldiers' daily meals and training rations from the mess hall were never discounted. A native-born officer like Ivan seemed to take it for granted. Only traditional knights like Dickinson and Ross, originally from the south and raised on the fiefdoms of noble lords, could truly grasp the unfathomable depth and strength of the United Kingdom, which had rapidly risen from the north in a short period of time, now fully operational with its massive war machine. The three chatted as they walked. When they reached the Monument Square, they were unsurprisingly blocked by a throng of people. Each of them had flowers to offer as condolences, and they could only helplessly distribute them to the children playing and weaving through the crowds. At noon, the ringing of bells echoed throughout the city, accompanied by the distant blast of 12 cannons from the city walls, officially marking the beginning of the Victory Day celebrations. His Majesty, in attendance, lived up to the expectations of the crowd. Although he delivered only a brief speech from a makeshift platform in front of the monument, the cheers of the people practically lit up the city sky. Flowers and streamers rained down, and everyone spontaneously raised their hands, offering blessings and prayers for a bright future for the United Kingdom. A moment of silence followed by the awarding of medals to soldiers, and a public address by the commander. The celebrations continued smoothly until dusk. Just before nightfall, the long-awaited performance finally began. Watching the actors on the stage, their passionate words echoing through the alchemical speakers, Ross and the other two quietly rose and left. "We will achieve ultimate victory. Completely annihilate the enemy from our homeland and liberate the millions of people oppressed by the nobility and slaughtered by foreigners." The young staff officer couldn't help but turn back to the stage, his gaze fixed on the actors' raised fists through the dense crowd. Somehow, he didn't see it as just a fleeting slogan or a line, but rather as the ideal and goal they would soon achieve. Chapter 597, A Conversation About the Future. The Victory Day celebrations continued late into the night. As the crowds gathered in Monument Square gradually dispersed, three spellcasters in classical robes slowly made their way through the dismantling theater stage, around the obelisk, and into the new Union building at the rear. The iconic landmark's top floor remained brightly lit throughout the night. Legendary chiefs Sereth and Dawson dismissed the remaining members of the experimental team, who had been busy all day, and awaited the arrival of Spellshield, Flamesun, and Stormrunner. Undoubtedly, the 5% were not only high-ranking members of the Spellcaster Union, but also founding members of the Magic Network Forum. "What do you three think?" Dawson asked directly, without casting a defensive spell to block prying eyes. "Can the new Union replace the old system and lead spellcasters back to the true path of pursuing truth?" The proposition raised by this question was so grandiose that the three high-ranking members froze in their tracks, none daring to answer. Sereth stood motionless before the brightly lit floor-to-ceiling window, his eyes slightly closed, expressionless. The Son of Fire, who hadn't met his teacher in private for a long time, was not embarrassed. He spread his hands and said, "What is the right path? Neither of the two chiefs knows, let alone others. Compared to the rotten Federation and those stupid magical politicians, I only know that we won the first battle against the crisis of alien invasion." Dawson rolled his eyes in annoyance, "But your performance was worse than those of mortal soldiers. Even if Gallagher himself were present, he would probably be ashamed to see the reputation of the prestigious Mage Corps tarnished." Shield coughed lightly and quickly intervened to smooth things over. "Your Excellency Chief, since we are fighting a joint battle, there should be no distinction between us. In the eyes of His Majesty Harvey, the contributions of battle mages and soldiers are equally important. This is true. While everyone knows this privately, publicly, the United Kingdom supreme rulers do adhere to the promises and standards of the Equal United Front. Judging from the Victory Day celebrations that just concluded today, the mages who participated in the battle were given the opportunity to receive awards for their achievements, and the public was generous with their praise and admiration. It's just that they've never been so close to mortal society before. Whether it's the decades-long battles against demons in the Evil Moon Mountains, or the occasional magical beast invasions across the southern kingdoms, spellcasters, whether from the Union or the Seven Wizarding Kingdoms, have always been seen by the common people as the epitome of the extraordinary and mysterious. This star-class distinction, created by the disparity in power and intelligence, is even greater than the gap between commoners and nobles. Stormwalker pondered for a long time and said in a deep voice, "Yes, In the past, we firmly believed that only spellcasters with extraordinary powers could take on the harsh mission of fighting against alien races and protecting the continuation of the tribe. Many of our colleagues who died heroically on the demon battlefield also felt the same way, but the facts have proved that the enemies we face now are very different from the church or the demons in the past. Relying solely on the power of spellcasters, I am afraid we can't escape the fate of failure. The magic resistance of the lizardmen is indeed a weapon to restrain spellcasters. Even high-level combat mages find it difficult to gain the upper hand from them on the front battlefield. What's more, the enemies are numerous and do not care about casualties at all. Compared with mages who need to be carefully trained for decades before they can go into battle, the magical advantages that human extraordinary people can rely on no longer exist. Seraph suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, turned around, and smiled. Perhaps the time has come for us to lay aside our burdens, abandon our so-called transcendental arrogance and pride, and truly fight shoulder to shoulder with mortals. The so-called path of truth isn't the path of spellcasters, but the future of humanity as a whole. With his words, the shield felt a wave of relief, realizing that the legendary chief had officially gone from tacit approval of their private choice to follow Harvey to public recognition. This wasn't essentially a battle of truth and ideals. With the church weakened and the demons retreating, the dire situation of alien invasion truly demanded a new spellcasting organization, one that could rebuild a better order within the decaying union. A long-lost sense of relief washed over him. Looking up at the two legendary spellcasters again, he realized they seemed to have shed their former aura of unattainable authority, becoming more trustworthy and reliable, pure researchers, leaders who would guide the new generation of spellcasters to a new path forward. And he himself would be able to break free from the political shell of the union's high-ranking officials. His old desire for power and position no longer mattered. The magic laboratory he hadn't stepped into for a long time seemed to have reignited his desire. Chief, I intend to apply to His Majesty Harvey on my own behalf to join the Academy of Magical Sciences. Dawson chuckled and nodded. Please do so. Compared to the new union's newly established research team on the lizardmen, those necromancers, oh no. They're sole mages. The research projects and topics they have launched are clearly more valuable and attractive. Research on the lizardmen and their floating island fortresses started too late, and the progress was minimal. It really didn't hold much appeal for the research mages who later joined as individuals. He turned to Son of Flame and Stormrunner, and asked with a smile, what about you? His Majesty Harvey is also planning to establish a spellcaster combat unit, intending to completely dismantle the battle mages and integrate them equally into his mortal army. Are you willing to accept this approach? Son of Flame shrugged complacently. Why not? My performance at the Battle of Great Bear Lake was evident to all, and the Northern Army's Special Operations team has already extended an olive branch to me. Stormrunner also said solemnly, I plan to join the Independent Air Combat Regiment. After the three former high-ranking officials of the Federation announced their respective choices and destinations, the atmosphere suddenly became awkward. What would the two leaders choose? Would they serve as the Federation's legendary mascot from afar, while personally managing the newly established Federation on behalf of the Northern Emperor? Simultaneously serving as the supreme leaders of two powerful wizarding organizations. If word got out, it would likely cause great unrest in the wizarding world. How would the high-ranking members of the 7 wizarding nations react? And what would the many wizarding families of the Southern Territory think? Before they could ask, Sereth's casual words stunned them, leaving them completely stunned. Gallagher will lead his followers in breaking away from the Union and the Black Rock City Wizard Alliance, becoming an independent warband of the new Union stationed in the Evil Moon Mountains, and Dawson and we will simply resign our positions as chiefs and establish ourselves in the North as honorary speakers of the new Union. Chapter 598 Alienation and Upgrade. Resign as chief. Fadden felt that he was a little incoherent. But the Federation cannot be without a chief. Without the legendary spellcaster, those magical politicians who are already ready to make moves will probably tear each other apart and start fighting among themselves. The Spellcasters Federation was originally established more than 100 years ago out of the High Wizards Council. Almost 99% of the people in the factions within it have a wizard family background. When we were here, they fought secretly a lot. Haha, tripping each other up, framing and slandering each other, suppressing academics, and even evolving it to the point of secret assassinations and killings. What's the difference? It's nothing more than bringing the secret fights directly to the table. After we stepped down, they will definitely be eyeing the vacant position of chief. By then, they will be busy fighting for power and will not block the development of the new federation. I see, Fadden nodded secretly. The three chiefs intend to keep them busy with internal strife and have no time to take care of other things. Anyway, these stubborn and conservative guys will not be used by the North, so they might as well let them destroy their own foundation. Saras didn't intend to dwell on the topic. He slowly walked over to the planetary energy array and stroked the smooth brass. I still remember. His Majesty Harvey was already a high-level spellcaster before he joined the Magic Network Forum and officially became an agent, correct? The shield's heart sank, and he replied doubtfully, that's undeniable. Since its inception, the Forum has only invited powerful members of high rank and above. Of course, as the strength of many small groups within the Forum grew, a few pseudo-high-ranking members emerged, qualified for advancement but whose magic patterns hadn't yet been fully established. Most of these individuals were recommended and sponsored by group leaders, a form of backdoor entry and preemptive position. The administrators and observers acquiesced to this. As an agent, Harvey was busy with various matters in the real world and was likely burdened with the missions assigned by the Forum. They wouldn't actively interfere with these minor actions. You two excellencies suspect that he is already above the high level. Stormwalker felt a little outrageous when he said this. The promotion to legend is a difficult path that is 1 in a million. There are only a few people like you two in the human race in the Southern Territory, not to mention an absolute outlier like Excellency Gallagher. Dawson narrowed his eyes and directly revealed his old friend's details. Gallagher followed the ancient wizard's dragon-chasing path, which is completely different from us. But I can be 100% sure that Harvey did not get promoted in this way. The Son of Flame was completely unable to hold back. He spread his hands and said angrily, Your Excellencies, why should we doubt an ally and companion who opens his arms to us and works hand in hand with us without reservation? What difference does it make whether he is high level or legendary? It is enough for him to lead human spellcasters on the right path and command the southern countries to resist foreign enemies. For Holden, the rank of a research mage made no difference to him. It was nothing more than burying oneself in the laboratory, tinkering with alchemical instruments and magical materials. Of course, legendary research mages possessed certain advantages over ordinary humans. While not adept at combat, their vast mental and magical reserves were enough to render fire mages bruised and battered with a mere pile of text. Under the sheer weight of magical power and rank, even elaborate high-level offensive techniques were occasionally ineffective. Salas turned his gaze on his former disciple, his invisible presence forcing him to look away. Then, he said lightly, So? A new guide, it's time for us old hands to be buried, right? Seeing the two men about to clash, Dawson quickly intervened to smooth things over. Ahem. Although Salas and I have ascended to legendary status, we're still limited by our own lifespans. And as you all know, Salas, suffering from soul dissociation syndrome, was fortunately rescued, but he's effectively trapped near the energy formation, unable to escape. It's simply a relocation of the prison from the underground mines to the larger and more prosperous Spark City. He paused, then sighed. As for me, I'm the same age as him. Although I've always been cautious and avoid seeking death, mortal lifespans eventually reach their limits. Before that day arrives, I hope to truly realize my long-cherished wish, creating a brand new school of spellcasting, completely divorced from the existing system of magical development. Harvey's creation of soul spellcasting, derived from the undead school, already seems to be showing signs of this. So, Harvey's strength and background are of vital importance to us. Although it's difficult to say, as legendary spellcasters, we do have something to ask of His Majesty the Emperor and his agent. Shield suddenly realized something and said, So you two suspect His Majesty Harvey has secretly ascended to legendary status? With all due respect, that's hard to believe. Sarath shook his head, his eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of confusion barely visible. Dawson is best at mental probing. While directly attempting to perceive an opponent's background is considered rude and offensive by most, we have each used subtle methods, covertly. Huh? The three Sons of Flame opened their mouths in shock. Have the chiefs lost their minds? Even if they didn't care about their worldly power and imperial status, simply attacking their designated agent in front of the two mysterious beings behind the forum would likely completely infuriate them. Dawson frowned and interrupted, He's empty. What's empty? Fadden swallowed his saliva and replied dryly, Harvey likes to control a soul puppet in his daily life. It's a lifeless body, so it's naturally empty. Salas chuckled and said lightly, How can we not know that the puppet he controls is an empty shell? I'm talking about his flesh and blood body. The body is empty? What does that mean? The son of fire was shocked and frightened, and couldn't help asking, Harvey's body is occupied by some external existence. That's not right. Could it be the two people behind the forum? Dawson waved his hand and explained patiently, no, his body is not occupied. I can confirm that he is still him. It's just that Salas and I can't sense the magic barrier from him. The so-called magic barrier is actually the biggest obstacle that a spellcaster will encounter when he is promoted. This is the basic rule of the operation of the alien space magic network. No one can escape it. If you are not careful, not only will your promotion fail directly, but you may even suffer from magic decline and difficult to heal hidden injuries. We can't sense his rank. It's like other people have a spiral staircase inside their bodies, but what Dawson and I see is a twisted, yet endless, smooth road. It's as if his magic patterns don't need to be constructed, and his magic rings haven't been reshaped. Salas pondered for a moment before slowly revealing the truth that made him confused. Chapter 599, Active Peace. Isengard, the royal capital of Iron Hill. Your Highness, the Regent. An urgent letter from Baron Ramirez of Fanehold, a knight of the Royal Guard, hurried into the palace hall and handed a secret letter, freshly removed from an eagle's claws, to Prince Andrew, who sat on the throne. For a moment, all the nobles turned their attention to the regent, awaiting his next response in utter silence. Ramirez sent 3 consecutive scouts to the Wolf-Fang Ridge area, and the reports he received all stated, there's been no movement from St. Valen's army. Andrew crumpled the letter in his hand and threw it at his feet. He patted the armrest of his throne and stood up. Looking around, he said solemnly, I believe the newly enthroned Emperor St. Valen knows that with only a few thousand troops, he won't gain anything from us. The counselor standing at the bottom of the stairs asked in confusion, then why do they continue to entrench themselves in the Wolf-Fang Ridge area? Neither declaring war nor withdrawing, are they just keeping their troops going and wasting food? Prince Andrew shook his head, then gritted his teeth and said, they've been planning an undeclared war from the beginning. They rashly sent a surprise attack on the border, then captured the highland city closest to Wolf-Fang Ridge, and then continued northward. They're simply trying to contact the rootless people entrenched in the northern desert and incite them to stir up civil unrest in our country, and then profit from it. Andrew is well aware of Emperor St. Valen's actions in the Duchy of Barclay. He launched lightning raids on the noble lords of neighboring borderlands, plundering vast swathes of their wealth and slaves, acts as shameless and barbaric as a robber. He also took advantage of this opportunity to lure in foreign enemies north of the Sacred Spine Mountains. That's how Belloc fell so unprepared. Even Duke Belloc himself, thinking of this, Prince Andrew couldn't help but feel a surge of joy. Though Belloc was only a border duke, his distinguished background and personal abilities made him a legitimate candidate for the throne. Unlike the other southern kingdoms, Isengard's king was not hereditary, but rather elected by a joint effort of the church and the High Council of the nation. Although the king's election had been postponed indefinitely since he seized power, the sudden death of a powerful contender was a boon for Andrew. Isengard's territory is vast, half grassland and half desert. Oases are scattered throughout the kingdom's north, while the southeastern border is dominated by mountains. It's a typical landlocked, closed kingdom. Nearly 1,000 miles of desert separate Belek and the royal capital, Iron Hill, with only a few trade routes connecting them. This meant that news of its fall reached the capital nearly a month late. The official letter delivered to him by the St. Varens contained absurd news, something about a northern barbaric enemy about to invade the southern border, the demon lizards wielding their power to destroy everything, and the need to mobilize the people south as quickly as possible while preparing to resist the invading forces. What a joke. What great foreign enemy could possibly exist north of the Godspeen Mountains? Aren't they just the fell orcs who occasionally cross the mountains to plunder the northern border? What kind of horrible disaster could those damned barbaric tribes bring to the southern border? It's not even worth sending a detachment of elite cavalry to wipe them out. The journey would be long and costly, and what would it mean to drive them away and slaughter them completely? They'd just come back the next year. After all, the only ones suffering were the rootless tribes in the remote borderlands. The counselor pondered for a moment, then carefully proposed, but this time the fell orcs' invasion is much more swift and fierce than before. The fall of Belek wasn't accidental. We should do something about it. After all, indeed, east of Belek, amidst a vast desert, lie several small oasis settlements. While these settlements may not be overpopulated and lack fortified walls, they all harbor gold and gemstone mines of vital importance to the kingdom. Many of these mines are even Prince Andrew's personal property, so no carelessness is warranted. Okay. Even if it's a group of evil orcs who have gone crazy with burning, killing and looting, they can't cause any big waves. Send 1,000-man Iron Hill cavalry to them. Half a month is enough to clean up the mess. Andrew raised his hand and ordered his guards to pass on the order. At the same time, he pretended to be regretful and said, also, let them send a team of people to Belloc to take back the city ravaged by the evil orcs and see if there are any surviving descendants of the Duke's family who need to be resettled. Alice, His Majesty is now crazy and unable to manage things. Before the election of the king, I'm afraid we still have to consider the issue of the Duke of Belloc's successor. There was no need to think about these words carefully. They clearly expressed the regent's intention to wipe out the roots. The nobles below knew it clearly, but under his power, no one dared to stand up and say anything. For Prince Andrew, using the king's sudden bout of madness as an excuse to seize control of the royal capital, Iron Hill, was tantamount to controlling most of Isengard. With 5,000 elite Iron Hill cavalry at his disposal, as long as the king held on, he had a legitimate reason to delay the king's election indefinitely, slowly eliminating any rivals for the throne. At this critical juncture, whether it was the fell orcs rampaging along the northern border or St. Varen's unprovoked border invasion, avoiding outright war with either was the best option. Andrew raised his hand and summoned the imperial scholar, whispering, "Has the messenger sent to the holy city yet to return? Is his holiness still avoiding him?" "What is Bishop Amo's attitude?" the scholar quickly whispered. "No news yet. After the Spear of Glory's defeat in St. Valen's capital, the Archbishop is likely furious with the Divine Punishment faction within the Inquisition. The only two remaining Inquisition legions in the kingdom have been withdrawn and stationed in Goris. The sudden and complete withdrawal of the Holy See, which had always maintained close ties with the Isengard royal family, naturally provided Andrew with a golden opportunity to control the situation, but also, it was a stark expression of disapproval of his rash attempt to seize power. Andrew snorted coldly. Since the St. Valenians are occupying Wolffang Ridge and refuse to move, perhaps engaging them and negotiating would be a good option. If they couldn't secure the church's support, they could simply try to win over those secular kingdoms that openly opposed them. Wasn't St. Valen currently ruled by a wizard emperor? Extending him an olive branch. Attach a letter with my regent's seal and send it to St. Varen, telling His Majesty the Emperor that if he has no intention of invading Isengard, I concede Wolffang Ridge to him directly, and they can also station troops in the nearby Highland City. Didn't he just want a border pass in Isengard that he could completely control, from which he could plunder the gold and gems of the surrounding noble territories, as well as the population of the rootless people? As long as he could reach a temporary alliance with them, Andrew felt that this price was still affordable. Chapter 600, The End of the Cavalry. The sky was gloomy, thick clouds obscuring the early spring sunlight. A cavalry of gleaming cavalry galloped across the vast grasslands. The leading knight, draped in a gray-black cloak, was followed closely by two guards, each holding aloft the heraldic banners of the Knights of Iron Hill. The mighty column quickly reached the riverbank. At the command of the knight leader, the knights dismounted, but made no attempt to set up camp or rest. The mighty waters of the Chatlan River, over 100 meters wide, flowed like a silvery ribbon, silently across the vast grasslands. Chatlan is also the ancient Isengardian word for mother. The river, freshly thawed in early spring, surged, its waters swollen. The murky waves, laden with mud and broken wood from afar, surged downstream with an almost unruly force. The cavalry's destination was none other than Oasis City, located over 10 miles upstream of the Chatlan River. Under orders from His Royal Highness, Regent Andrew, they would station a short-term garrison there while simultaneously patrolling the desert's edge and eliminating any evil orcs that had infiltrated the kingdom's heartland. "Sir, we've been sacked without cause. Based solely on the councillor's speculation, we've been sent to this desolate oasis. Belek is 1,000 miles away. I'm afraid there won't even be a single evil orc in this area," a personal guard whispered a complaint to the cavalry commander, handing him a water bag. Bednes took the water bag, frowned slightly, and said calmly, "I see you've become too lazy in the capital, reluctant to leave the comforts of the brothels and whorehouses. You even dare to criticize the orders of His Royal Highness the Regent." Behind his back, he stood up and stretched his shoulders. It had been a long time since he led his troops into battle, and as the commander of the cavalry regiment, he had neglected training. The armor felt a bit heavy. But the Iron Hill cavalry had always been traditional, and they were not allowed to remove their armor before reaching camp. If they wanted to relax completely, they had to wait until they reached Oasis City. Bednes took a few sips of water and was about to signal his cavalry to continue their journey when his beloved warhorse suddenly raised its head, twitched its ears, and snorted loudly at the surroundings. A faint smell of blood lingered in the air. "Sir, look at the river. There are dead bodies, so many floating down from upstream." Upon hearing this, Bednes gazed intently at the surging water. He saw, indeed, dozens of bodies, face up, floating rapidly downstream in the murky current. The bodies had drifted down from upstream. He immediately sensed something was amiss and, leaning on his sword, shouted, "Mount your horses! Rescue Oasis!" Before the knights could react, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. The horses neighed in terror, and several guards struggled to control the reins, barely preventing them from breaking free and abandoning their masters. The sharp whistle of a blade piercing the wind suddenly echoed from the river. Though Bednes's back was to the water, he drew his sword and swung forward, swinging at the critical moment. With a sharp clang of metal clashing, a sudden, inky black spear was knocked away by the sword, half buried in the earth. Bednes stumbled back several steps, his weapon nearly losing its grip from the shock. The next moment, dozens of dark figures suddenly emerged from the murky river, spreading wings several meters long as they swooped down towards the river bank, wielding the very spears that had attacked the cavalry commander. "Shoot!" The knights, suddenly snapped to attention, unhooked their crossbows from their horses, aimed at the incoming enemy, and pulled the trigger. Dozens of crossbow bolts whirred out, piercing the winged monsters. The crossbows, so effective in previous battles, were effortlessly deflected by the monsters wielding spears. The crowd could hardly believe what was happening. Before Bednes could issue another command, the enemy raised their spears and launched a barrage of hurled spears at them. The spears struck with lightning speed, leaving the heavily armored knights with no time to roll to avoid them. They were pierced through, armor and body, with such force that they were pinned to the ground, their breastplates shattering into pieces. They died before they could even utter a scream. A single round of hurling spears felled the heavily armored knights standing near the river bank, many of them without even having time to remove the shields slung from their horses. Bednes gritted his teeth, channeling the power of his bloodline, and swung his sword again, knocking away two spears that were hurtling straight at him. Finally, his palm cracked under the weight of the blow, and his sword fell from his grasp. Though seasoned in battle and highly skilled, his awakened bloodline talent wasn't one for strength. It was merely the most common, low-level talent, affinity, a telepathic connection with his steed, enabling near-perfect unity between man and mount during a charge. He was about to draw his offhand dagger from his belt when he looked up to see a winged monster hovering in the sky. Suddenly, it raised its palm toward him, a dazzling, piercing red light condensed within its palm. The battle on the riverbank was like a sudden nightmare for the over 1,000 Iron Hill cavalrymen. Monsters with twisted forms and pitch-black skins continuously emerged from the river, some fluttering high into the sky, others clambering onto the shore and instantly conjuring weapons in their hands to join the fray. In this clash, whether in numbers or individual strength, they overwhelmingly outnumbered these elite mortal knights. Rather than a melee, it felt more like a one-sided slaughter. Especially after the death of Bednes, the only commander possessing low-level bloodline power, the soldiers, their wills gradually crumbling, were overwhelmed. They were pierced through the chests by the demonic lizardman spears or blasted into pieces by bolts of red lightning. In less than half an hour, the riverbank was soaked with sticky blood. The dying, still breathing, wailed incessantly. Those who dropped their weapons and attempted to flee were quickly pursued by the winged living and easily killed. In the chaos, some even jumped directly into the river, sinking to the bottom in their full steel armor. The knightly banner, stabbed in the ground, had been tilted at some point, its emblem of crossed swords and the sun symbol stained with blood and mud. The mingled smell of blood and rust transformed the riverbank into utter hell. The rushing river brought down more floating corpses from upstream, floating downstream. Looking closely, one could vaguely see several thick smoke columns rising into the sky from the direction of the oasis more than 10 miles away, as if the entire oasis was engulfed in a huge sea of fire. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, Subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.